Morning. I think we're ready to start our meeting, the April 18, 2018 meeting of the Intellectual and Developmentally Disabilities Task Force. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and before we do introductions, I just would like to acknowledge and recognize and thank Representative Sheila Lker, who is with us. Sheila, let us see you. Stand up. And Representative Sally Segrist. They are both such strong advocates for people with disabilities, and we thank you for being here. We also understand that they have busy schedules, so they probably are going to not be able to stay with us the entire meeting, but we appreciate you being here. Thank you. And if we can just start with Rebecca, go around for those people that are watching us as we live stream and introduce ourselves and why we are here, who we represent. So,
Rebecca Casper, General Counsel to the Lieutenant Governor.
Good morning, Joshua Fuji with the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning.
I'm Kim Mywas with Self-Advocacies of Boone County, ARC.
Jason Meyer with Passages in Columbia City.
Steve Cook, President of NARF.
Kim Dodson, the Executive Director for the ARC of Indiana.
Betty Williams, Self-Advocate of Indiana and the ARC of Indiana.
David Reed, Department of Child Services.
Hi, I'm Kathleen McAllen. I'm here today as mom to Scott, whose 19th birthday is today.
oh,
Christine Dahlberg, Executive Director of the Governor's Council for People with Disabilities.
get turned on.
Burleson, CEO of Bridges.
David Bozell, Division of Mental Health and Addiction, sitting in for our Director, Kevin Moore.
Christina Thomas, Director of First Steps. Kylie Hope, Director of the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services.
The Director of the Office of Special Education for the Department of Education.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. And I want to thank Wabash Center for hosting this event and also for all the good work they do for people with disabilities here in Indiana. So thank you for that. And we will have a listening session. The first hour of our meeting will be dedicated to listening and hearing from the public and from providers, and that will be facilitated by Dawn Barngrover here at Wabash Center. Dawn, thank you for that, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Welcome, everybody.
Just a little bit briefly about Wabash Center, if you're unfamiliar to us. We are celebrating our 65th anniversary this year. I feel like Ms. Sheila Lker could probably describe Wabash Center better than I, as she's been so involved over the years, and we thank her for that. So we are celebrating our 65th anniversary this year. 65 years ago, we started with just a few families unwilling to accept the answer of institutionalizing their children. And so they put an ad in the paper searching for other families that might be in the same situation and began meeting in the basement of their home. And so today we serve a little over 600 people in a variety of different programs. We support all ages, school-age children to people in the end of their life. And we also support them in their families' homes. We support them in our supported living sites. We support them in their own home out in the community. We also have day program services here. We have employment services here on campus as well. And we have an after-school program and summer program that continues to grow. So again, welcome. We're so very happy to be your host today. I have a...
Yes, we might offer Representative Lker and Segrist if they have any comments.
Absolutely.
Would that be acceptable?
Absolutely, yes.
Representative Lker, do you have any comments you would like to make to the, and then Representative Segrist?
Good morning, everyone. I have worked with many of these people, David and Steve, and legislation with Kim Dodson, and many of the clients I know pretty well here. They're yelling outside the classroom. So, you know, we spent some time here, and rightfully so. We chaired the MRDD Commission, which turned into the DD Commission, and I know Lieutenant Governor Crouch is familiar with that. The folks that came to that with John Dickerson and Kim said, we're offended by MR, which we referred to as mentally retarded. They wanted developmental disability. So we changed that to the DD, and we were very pleased with the results of that. But then, unfortunately, the Legislative Council did not keep the DD Commission moving. So we have missed our interim study committee quite a bit, but we're continuing to work through legislation during certainly the year. Even though we're not in a committee setting, we certainly are working. And I have, many of you know I have a heart for this area. We passed a lot of legislation going back to with Steve, Dave, and others here, First Steps, 0 to 2, preschool for handicap, 3 to 5. That's when Democrats were Little Even Steven. Suzanne, we had 50-50. We passed a lot, Guardian ad litem CASA, and we're still working together. I'm kidding there, but we did pass a lot of great legislation that was very meaningful, not only to parents, but to the future of our children with disabilities. So I appreciate the fact that all of you are working in that area. Thank you for what you do. I had a personal story. The second child in our family, Carol, was Down syndrome. My parents went to St. Coletta's, which the doctor told them to take my sister to. They went and decided, nope, that's not what they were going to do. So my Down syndrome sister lived with us, and I learned certainly a lot by that, and she lived to be 73, and actually had an operation at 68, hernia operation at Dr. Madura in Indianapolis. So I've been through some of this personally when my mother said, I want to outlive Carol, which she did not. She died in 1989, and Carol lived to 2001, so we were the caregivers. So I'm pretty familiar with that, and at that time, Nobel School, unless you were high functioning, would not take you. They tested you, and so Carol had a lot of things going on at home that were learning situations, but not actually a place like this, which is absolutely wonderful. We just appreciate how hard all of you have worked to get this kind of education and workforce started, because I know she would have loved it. And if Dean Martin or Frank Sinatra came on, she would tell you who that singer was. I can tell you that. Anyway, thank you all for what you do. We appreciate you very much, and we'll keep trying to make strides in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and everyone here, familiar faces. And my involvement here is not nearly as long as Representative Klinker's, but I am a native of Lafayette. I've been a CASA, and I work on the Mental Health and Addiction Task Force. Passed some legislation about human trafficking this year that touches my heart in many of the same ways. I have a cousin who has made his life's work running Peoria Production Shop in Peoria, Illinois, which is a similar working facility but does not have the wonderful wraparound services that Wabash Center provides. I always tell him about Wabash Center, and he expresses longing that Illinois would have something similar. Unfortunately, Illinois is not in great shape to be starting new programs, as most of you probably know. And so they don't have the ability to give the support that the state of Indiana and our community does. I can't say enough good about what goes on here, and while I have not been involved in legislation in this area, I would always be happy to and would hope that you would reach out to me with any ideas that you have, and I'll continue to do the local things that I do to support residents and families. Thank you so much.
Thank you to both of the representatives for their kind comments. I'll now read the opening statement. The House Enrolled Act 1102 established a task force for assessment of services and supports for individuals with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. We will now begin a 50-minute listening session during which the public may offer comments to the task force. We have a sign-in sheet for those wishing to make public comment. As facilitator for the listening session, I will recognize people on a first-come, first-speak basis and will ask people to keep their comments to 2 minutes or less. In order to accommodate all those who wish to make public comment, I will ask you to conclude your comments after 2 minutes. So the first person to speak is, please excuse me if I mispronounce this name, Sharisa Darland.
Good morning, and thank you for letting us be here today. I'm Carissa Darland, and I serve First Steps in Cluster D. We do Tippecanoe County and 10 different surrounding counties as well. We are Indiana's early intervention for kiddos 0 to 3 who have developmental delays or a medical diagnosis that could lead to developmental delay. And I also apologize because I'm a horrible public speaker. Everything they tell you not to do in school, I'm going to do. So I'm going to look straight down at this, not look at any of you. Not against you, I'm just terrified of you. So, so I just want to talk a little bit about how we make a difference in our families' lives. Typical services provided in this area: service coordination, developmental therapy, including developmental therapy for blind and visually impaired, hearing impaired, and parent advisors, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, and audiology services. Service coordination. Indiana has dedicated service coordinators who act as a parent's guide through their IFSP Individual Family Service Plan experience. Every child who's eligible for a program is automatically entitled to the service coordinator, even if they're not showing a need of services at this time. Service coordinator typically completes an intake meeting, sets up an evaluation, and writes the IFSP for the child. They are in contact with the family monthly via phone or text or email and meet with the family at least 3 times a year to discuss IFSPs and any modifications or transitions to the service plan. Service coordinator also conducts a transition meeting to the family to discuss options after your child turns 3. Natural environments. So we come to them. Studies have shown that infants and toddlers are most open in environments that they're familiar with, typically at home or daycare. All our appointments happen in a child's natural environment to encourage optimal learning of skill sets and parental follow-through. Providers providing services in a natural environment allows the therapist and family to set up a home in a way that will help their child safely learn new skills. Therapists are actually discouraged from bringing in their own toys because if we take away bring in child's toys and then take them away, what are they going to be working with throughout the rest of the year? Our biggest thing is teaching the parents to help be their child's therapist. So thank you so much for your time and letting us talk about the needs of our community.
Thank you. Next speaker is Tammy.
Thank you. My name is Tammy Friesen, and I'm the Executive Director with Goldenrod in Lker County, and we provide residential and community supports for all ages across 4 counties. And parents attempting to navigate through the world after their child is diagnosed with an intellectual or developmental disability is challenging. As service providers, we do what we can to guide families, but we too find the world in which we operate difficult to maneuver. We have teams working together in the area of education and teams working together in the area of supportive services, and yet there is little to no collaboration. As service providers, it can be challenging to fully participate and be accepted on IEP teams, but to truly meet the needs of the child and the family, every provider of services to that child should be at the table to ensure more positive outcomes. A truly multidisciplinary approach should include all service providers in an individual's life and should not be limited to schools or agencies. Person-centered planning across all will only benefit the individual in the long run. As a service provider in Northern Indiana, the most heartbreaking thing is to tell a parent that we cannot serve their child until they contact the BEADS office and begin the waiver process. Now, let me tell you that we're not talking about young children, though. We're talking about young adults getting ready to age out of the school system, and they haven't even started the process. Many families are doing what they can while their child is in the public school setting, and in Elkhart County, we only have one school system currently that has a designated staff member guiding families through the transition process. Families are completely unaware of their options post-high school, and we must find a way to bridge the gap. With the focus in Indiana on more inclusive practices, now more than ever, we need all systems to be coordinated, whether in First Steps programming or transition planning in the high schools. We know that the supports necessary for individuals, and intellectual or developmental disabilities must be intentional and focused for these individuals to be more fully included. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Next speaker is Joe. No, thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Spelker. I'm with RALC. We're in Southern Indiana in New Albany. We provide a variety of services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Today I'm here to talk about First Steps. We are the provider in 7 counties in Southern Indiana, a little over 500 children each year. The program's been very successful and nothing but universally positive results. The families, the children all seem to benefit. One of the things that we've done is last year we raised some funds at one of our events to provide our therapists with iPads. So everybody, all 50 plus therapists have access to iPads, and they use this to enhance the therapy sessions. And we're about a year into this, and I can once again report nothing but excessively positive results. And let me be clear, we're not using this as a therapy, we're using this to enhance therapy. So it's just one piece of what our therapists are using with these children, and it seems to really be laying this foundation, we'll call it a technology foundation, so when they get to the next phase of their education process, preschool, et cetera, this isn't new to them. They're not behind their peers even further because they've never had technology or access to technology. So we asked the task force to please consider if this might be something that's expandable across the state and partner with somebody like Lilly Foundation, et cetera, to provide these iPads, because there's, in all the therapies. So it's been good for all speech therapy, physical, all of it. They've been able to use these iPads. So just want to let you know it's been successful for us and maybe it could work for others. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joe. Next speaker is Katherine Hargreaves.
Morning. My name is Katherine Hargreaves. I'm currently the Early Intervention Program Manager at Easter Seals Crossroads. I've been a credentialed early intervention provider in Indiana for 15 years, but have been providing early intervention services for over 20 years, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you also about First Steps today. Easter Seals Crossroads provides First Step services in Tipton, Hamilton County, and most of Marion County. As an agency, we look to recruit skilled clinicians to provide First Step services in all of our disciplines. We are looking for providers that are committed to working with infants and toddlers in their natural environments to make the biggest possible impact in children's growth and development. These providers must be willing to travel throughout our service area in all times of the year. They must be skilled at not only working with young children, but also working with the adults that care for these children. Providers are expected to provide First Step services in a wide variety of environments, many of which are extremely challenging and occasionally where personal safety concerns may arise. They are asked to engage families by tailoring services to the routines and priorities of each individual family. As an agency, we are constantly looking to grow our team of providers at Easter Seals Crossroads so that we can continue to serve families in the First Steps program. However, recruiting providers for these roles is becoming increasingly difficult. First Steps rates were reduced by 6% in 2002 and an additional 5% in 2011. Entry-level requirements for both physical therapy and occupational therapy are moving from a master's level education to a doctoral program. As an agency, it's proven to be fiscally irresponsible to employ a provider to exclusively provide First Step services as a staff member. As a result, we rely heavily on part-time contractors. Since 2008, our agency's First Steps workforce has been reduced by 64%. However, the number of children served in First Steps continues to increase. We ask that this committee continue to look at ways to support the provision of quality early intervention services to the approximately 24,000 children that are served throughout the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Next speaker is Cody Moen.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address this task force. I'd first like to thank each of you for serving on this task force and addressing this very important topic to both my family and the future of our great state. My name is Cody Moen. I'm the twin and co-guardian of Seth, who was born with cerebral palsy. He uses a computer to communicate and also utilizes a power wheelchair for movement aid. Today, I'd like to address my brief remarks around the instability of our direct service professional workforce. Since June of last year, we have lost 3 DSPs as a family, most recently this past Friday. We lost one due to an unknown reason, but the other 2 were lost as they found employment with a higher wage and benefits with another employer. While the loss of these individuals was hard on my family and devastating to my brother, it is hard to get upset too long for someone furthering their financial stability. 2017, Movement started to stabilize the DSP workforce by authoring a 5% raise. My family recognizes that this is a great start, but it's just that, it is a start. We've experienced with each of these DSP losses over the last year, gaps between them are getting longer and longer. The workforce is simply not attracted to DSP jobs due to lack of compensation. My family works with Wabash Center for Services, and this is no fault of them, with limitations placed on them by the waiver program. I request the 1102 Task Force to please further look at the DSP shortage issue, as this constant transition is not only a hardship on my family, as my mom is taking a day of vacation to be with my brother, but also for my brother as he loses a friend each and every time. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Next speaker is Lana.
Hello. I timed this by my home stove, so I don't have much time. Hello, I'm Lana Rennick with Houston Group Homes. We were established in 1983. Currently, we have 5 homes, 3 in Crawfordsville, located in Montgomery County, and 2 in Lebanon, located in Boone County, and we are licensed for 40 individuals. Sometimes it's about figuring out what someone needs. Being in long-term care for nearly 40 years, I am invested. This has been my life. I have not stayed because of income opportunities, health insurance, and stress-free lifestyle. It's demanding, exasperating, and at times unsuccessful. You pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you go back at it. And then one day, after trying everything else, you realize this individual needs to babysit my dog Tanner, because this individual is unfriendly, no one likes him much, he destroys property, and often attempts self-abuse. It's not about dog sitting, it's about what you think is unattainable. As they sit on the couch, his arm is wrapped around Tanner, watching Clifford the Big Red Dog. Not because he likes Clifford, he thought Tanner would. As a company, the provider to individuals with disabilities, it is critical that we retain long-term staff. They must be invested. They can't be effective if they're constantly worrying about paying their bills by working overtime or a second job. We are required to provide 24/7 supervision, health maintenance, repetitive skill training, maintaining family involvement, community integration, financial counseling, relationship building, things that haven't even dreamed of yet. This brings me to the recommendations developing statewide health care for DSPs, increase wage caps, merge the benefits of CIH waiver into group homes, and answerable to ISBH. Because we have learned it is about quality of life and possibly not for just provider growth. By the way, Tanner's schedule is very full. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Renee.
Hi, my name is Renee Petri. I am the Lafayette Area Coordinator for Down Syndrome Indiana, and I'm also the parent of an 11-year-old daughter named Caroline who has Down syndrome. Thank you so much for all of you being here today and letting us speak. I want to speak on two topics that have already actually been addressed. One in particular is the pay scale of DSPs. I know for our family, we rely on Purdue students. It's a great resource here in our community. They graduate and they move on, but sometimes they can find better pay at the local mall or a fast food restaurant. And these people are watching our children every day, and they're so important to us, and we've had some great friendships made out of this. But the pay scale really needs to be looked at for those individuals. The other thing I want to speak about is our rural communities. I'm from a very small community about an hour from here, Warren County, Williamsport area, and we have families that we serve in those communities, and they don't have a lot of services there. Many times they have to come here to Lafayette, to Wabash Center, to other agencies because they just don't have that opportunity. They can't get staff out there, or maybe there's one staff in that particular discipline. And I really, I feel for those families. My husband and I have thought about moving back there to be closer to our family, but we're not going to because the services we need are right here in our community. And it would be only fair and the right thing to do to make sure that all of Hoosiers are getting the services that they need, whether they're in a large community or in a small rural community. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Renee. Next speaker is Andrea. Yes.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak today. I'm going to read off my paper because I'm a little nervous. I'm usually not. So I work for the Autism Society of Indiana. I've served on the ICC, and I currently serve on the LPCC, which is the local planning committee for First Steps. But I'm going to talk as a parent today. And this is where I'm going to start reading. At 2 months, Oliver was in respiratory failure, and we found ourselves at Riley for 90 days. 2 weeks later, he was trached, and 24 hours later, he died for 20 minutes while Andy and I stood at the end of his bed. We watched professionals bring our son back to us and attach the life support that we would rely on for the next year. That day, the day that we came home, we had 15 people standing in our living room. My mom had made a big pot of chili, and we all ate. But one of those people was our First Steps intake coordinator. She ended up being our angel. She would send 4 therapists every week for the first 3 years. That first year, they would celebrate with me. They would cry with me. Some days, they would be the only reason for me to get dressed. And on some days, it would be the only reason for me to get out of bed. As Oliver started to progress, he got better, and they would help me figure out ways to work with the vent and still allow Oliver to meet all of his milestones. It's hard to learn to crawl with a 3-foot leash, and it's even harder to learn to walk with one. I absorbed and questioned everything, wanting to participate in all of it, and it drove me to help him meet his best potential. We know the research around early intervention, but it was more than that. They empowered me. They helped me regain control over a situation that was out of my control, which allowed me to serve my son in the best and absolute way I could. That foundation was the foundation of potential that we would rely on for years to come. Oliver is now 9. He's academically on point with his peers. He's cute as a button, chubby cheeks, freckles in all the right places, great big brown eyes. He's witty, he's funny, he's adored by everyone who knows him. But our life isn't easy. We still use supports, we still rely on beads, we still have the family support waiver. We've had the waiver for 4 years now, utilizing both respite and music therapy services. Our respite girls are our family, learning to ebb and flow with our needs and to love both of our children without judgment and ignoring fault, appearing and disappearing where needed, punctuating our landscape to make us a functioning whole. Oliver has a 12-year-old sister, but that's another task force. We'll talk about her needs as a sibling later. My goal as a parent, and I'm sure like many others who are here, is to ensure that our children meet their best potential, whatever it is, wherever it is, that they're always raising the bar and consistently reaching to meet it. The hard reality is that Andy and I can't do that alone. It was never part of our dream, to need the state to provide supports and resources and services, but that's our reality. We will always need the state to provide what we can't. The thing is, I need you to meet your best potential as well. I need you to create innovative and progressive services. I need increased incentive for recruitment of staff. We need peer-related services. We need preteen and teenage employment services, and we need streamlined training for our staff. We need you to meet your best potential. We need to be able to access our waiver funds. Oh, I read that part, sorry. And I need you to meet your best potential so we can meet ours. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Last speaker is Heather Sorrells.
Good morning, I'm Heather Sorrells, Assistant Director with IPMG. IPMG has provided case management services for the CIH, FSW, and medical model waiver since September of 2006. Our experience in this field allows us the knowledge that case management is a vital, complex, and comprehensive service that extends beyond the day-to-day activities of the individual case managers. IPMG is committed to the full support of the efforts of this task force to enhance the quality of lives of individuals served, while understanding the necessity of implementing cost-effective measures. We surveyed our case managers to identify what families were requesting. Younger individuals and their families are seeking therapeutic and respite services. These services are frequently difficult to obtain and have lengthy waiting lists, but yet provide the most habilitative training. We encourage the task force to examine strategies to increase the workforce for licensed music, speech, and recreational therapists, along with behavior consultants. Families are seeking supports for their loved ones that allow them to both work and have a typical leisure life. The criteria to obtain a CIH waiver should be revisited, as families have life-changing circumstances that do not allow them to continue to support their loved one, yet do not meet the current emergency CIH waiver criteria. They are given provider choice lists that are multiple pages long, making the choice process overwhelming, and families frequently do not feel they truly are being offered options. Families want their case managers to be able to advocate on their behalf, to ensure services are delivered as agreed upon, but to also connect them to non-waiver supports and resources. With the current case management reimbursement rates, case managers are not able to devote enough time to advocacy, coordination with other services such as First Steps, and resource network building. The implementation of the Taskforce framework is a great step in furthering developing a comprehensive support system that does not rely solely on state-paid supports. We recommend that the division develop additional education methods available in a variety of media to further help educate individuals, families, and providers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
That's the last of the people that signed up, so if anyone else has decided to make a comment, come on.
I absolutely. Good morning. I'm Patrick Sandy. I'm from Easter Seals Crossroads in Indianapolis, Indiana. We are a comprehensive provider of services to folks with disabilities, all types of disabilities, developmental, psychiatric, physical, it doesn't matter. We serve over 7,000 persons on an annual basis. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today just to give you a few comments. Mine are strictly related to employment. The shift to order selection has resulted in a substantial reduction of services to persons with disabilities and has undermined the infrastructure of agencies and service providers with the necessary expertise to be able to support those individuals in securing employment. Since its implementation, order selection has created a significant drop in referrals to providers. We've seen a 20% reduction in referrals at Easter Seals Crossroads, but I know there are other providers across the state that have seen a much larger reduction in services. Why are we concerned about that? That kind of drop in services can quickly result in a dismantling of programs and resources that support the successful employment outcomes of folks with disabilities. We recommend that VR consider adjusting the referral process, as we believe that that reduction in referrals is not based on a demonstrated lack of need of service, but rather a systematic issue that is developed that's prevented those referrals from getting through the system quicker. Also, between August 1st of 2017 and January 12th of 2018, 886 persons with disabilities were deferred to other services through VR because of order of selection. Those individuals are either not receiving services at all or have been referred to other agencies like DWD or Work One. Those agencies lack the experience and resources to support many persons with disabilities in their job search, and furthermore, the entry-level positions that those individuals frequently secure don't meet the wage benchmarks that would qualify them as a positive outcome for DWD. This creates a real disincentive to being able to spend the time necessary to support those persons with disabilities in that system. This has been tried several times before, and it has never worked. What is it they say about doing the same thing over again and expecting a different outcome? It doesn't seem to make sense. The move to order of selection also has resulted in the need for a fresh look at the system that supports payments to persons or to providers for providing services to individuals. The system that's currently in place was actually developed when we were looking at having a variety of persons with disabilities in terms of severity that we'd be supporting. Now, with the change in order of selection, we're really working with those persons that are most in need. And as a result, I think the system that was developed isn't really providing adequate compensation to the service providers. And again, that could lead to dismantling of the system because providers just can't afford to keep it going. The last point I wanted to make just has to do with the budget issues that I know that VR is looking at having to face in the next year or so. I'll just make the comment that I'm sure you've heard many times before. The state needs to figure out some way of being able to draw down all the federal match dollars so that it can adequately support the providers and VR to provide services to persons with disabilities across the state of Indiana. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you. You actually asked me first, so I'll have you go next. Okay, if you want to come on up and sign in, and then I'll have her go next.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Wade Wingler, also with Easter Seals Crossroads, and I want to talk to you very quickly today about assistive and adaptive technology. Adaptive technology, also known as assistive technology, is defined by the Assistive Technology Act of 2004 as any item, piece of equipment, product, or system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capacities of individuals with disabilities. It's similarly defined like that in IDEA and the ADA and the Rehab Act. My definition in the vernacular is the tools and technologies that can help make the difference between dependence and independence in the lives of many people with disabilities. Examples that you might be familiar with include things like wheelchairs, canes, eyeglasses, hearing aids, cochlear implants, adaptive driving equipment, wheelchair accessible bathrooms, augmentative and alternative communication systems used by kids with autism, or perhaps the late Dr. Stephen Hawking. Special computer interfaces that help students and employees take notes, remember due dates, or get to their appointments on time. And also any of the services that go along with that equipment. Assistive technology is used in nearly every arena of the lives of people with disabilities, whether it's work or home or in the community. And some of this technology is considered healthcare and covered by insurance or Medicaid. Some is covered by voc rehab or employers. And yeah, order of selection may mean that some people aren't referred to the high quality expert providers of assistive technology they need. Other assistive technology is funded out of pocket, or sometimes it goes unfunded. And that means that the challenges that can be overcome with the help of assistive technology goes unaddressed, and that stifles independence. So you guys know this. We all live in a time and a place where we take technology for granted. When was the last time you tried to get through your day without your eyeglasses or your smartphone or your calendar? In fact, as a society, our technology use is on the rise, and it's going to continue to grow. So we request that you continue to make funding for assistive technology identification of needs and securing the right equipment a priority. For people with disabilities, access to assistive technology isn't simply a matter of convenience or even efficiency. It's sometimes the critical difference between being able to work, travel, learn, communicate, or live independently as possible.
Thank you. Savannah? Hello, my name is Savannah Smith, and I am an intense intervention special education teacher with Lker Community Schools. And I was part of the discussion with Goldenrod, and as a teacher, it is very, very important to me that the rest of our statement is heard. Tammy was talking earlier about multidisciplinary teams and the importance of that, especially with the inclusion movement. And currently, there is not one single system that has the level of supports necessary to do this well. Evidence has shown that the possibility of success for all individuals, regardless of ability, is more likely with a multidisciplinary team approach in a rich, positive, and inclusive setting. We also know that more progress can be made when all systems are coordinated and focused on common goals. Individuals with the most significant developmental disabilities often bring with them behavioral and mental health issues that are complicated and difficult to address. Models like systems of care or the life course wrap coordinated, fully integrated supports and services around the child, the family, the school, the workplace, and beyond. If we look at the systems of care and the life course models, find a way to merge the two processes, and expand them to include all agencies serving children and adults in Indiana, we will be on our way to achieving the most positive outcomes for all children and their families. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else that hasn't had a chance to get up and comment that wants to comment? Anybody else that did comment that wants to continue to comment? Come on up.
I'm back. One thing I did want to mention as well, some things that early intervention does for families, we provide resources and assessments. Our service coordinators goes into the families' homes, and we provide what's called a family assessment, where we go through the child's daily routines and also the strengths and needs of the families. Often we're able to find if a family needs assistance with utilities, food, rent, mortgage, applying for special health care assistance. Often therapists in the homes are there on a bi-weekly or weekly basis and able to help identify any families' additional needs. Early intervention also decreases the chances of a child being abused or neglected. Every child with an open DCS case is also automatically referred to us under the age of 3. We help with the opioid crisis. Every child who tests positive for exposure to opioids or has toxic exposure is automatically eligible for our services as well. And finally, a team collaboration. Our team consists of the child's doctor, service coordinator, parents and guardians, and assessment team, and ongoing provider. We also communicate with other agencies such as Early Head Start, DCS, class, etc. as needed. And on a personal note, my niece, Kata, she is 13 years old, but developmentally, she is about 5 or 6 years old. My nephew, Leland, is 9 years old. He still can't sit up on his own. He probably never will. So I know as a family member how hard it is, how important it is. And when I came into this, in college, when I decided to come into this field, they were a big reason for that. And I never expected to be rich from this field. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. But in college, I didn't expect to be able to pay my bills. And I know that that's one of the biggest things for turnover in service providers, is the fact that they love this field. They really want to make a difference. They are committed. We are committed. We've had a 19% increase in referrals in Tippecanoe County alone in the past year with no increase in funding. And actually a lot of turnover in not just our agency, but in the agency that provides therapy for these kiddos. And I know the reason for that is because people just have to choose. Do they want to make a difference, or do they want to be able to feed their children? So thank you so much for your time and your commitment to helping us with that as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so you can submit written comment if you so choose. I thank you, everybody, for participating in the public listening session, and I believe I turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Crouch, or Lieutenant, yes, yeah.
All right, with the task force, why don't we take a little break here and maybe start at noon instead of, or at 11, I'm sorry, instead of 11:05. That makes sense? That'll give us about, at noon?
Everyone's attention, please. For those tuning in at home, I'm Rebecca Casper, General Counsel to the Lieutenant Governor. The Lieutenant Governor apologizes. She had to step away for a few minutes, so she asked me to get the meeting started again in her stead. The next item we have on the agenda is the review and approval of the minutes from the February 23rd, 2018 meeting. I would point out that at the last meeting, the task force approved the revised vision and values, and those are included in the minutes.
Are there any additions, corrections? Yes, to the minutes.
The vision statement, the second bullet, the second sentence, I think we're missing a word between talent and live. I think it's supposed to be and, but I want to make sure that that's correct.
I think you're right.
Okay.
Will reflect, the minutes will reflect that addition of the word and. Are there any other additional corrections? If not, I'll consider a motion for approval. Second? It's been moved and approved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, oppose nay, and the minutes are approved. I'll move to the sample goals as framework for the task force report, and I'm going to turn this over to Kylie. She has done a great job on presenting and putting this together. So
in an attempt to have some more structure related to the ultimate goal is to have an appropriate report for this committee, based on the work that we did associated with the values and the visioning, and then the second meeting when we talked about barriers and needs, I attempted to take away kind of those overarching themes or goals for the task force and how we want to improve the lives with the appropriate service and supports for individuals with IDD. And so those are the kind of the goals in which I kind of outlined. Everyone can wordsmith them or however they want as well. I'm open to suggestions. But then the idea from the meeting, last meeting in December, is that right? Losing track of time. With the ideas of having some white papers and specific recommendations, I thought this was an opportunity, again, to put in where that makes the most sense for the overarching goals. So, for example, at the last meeting, we had a discussion about crisis intervention and those needs, and as a sample, I identified that as part of a develop a system to timely respond to crisis under Goal 3, which outlines the ability to respond to individual and family needs. Same with, there's been a lot of discussion regarding structured family caregiving options in Indiana. And then again, I have that listed under Goal 1 regarding the prioritization of typical community settings. So this is just, again, a sample. It's a framework to get us started to kind of have some more meat to the framework of the report. I don't know that we want to go into wordsmithing everything to death right at this moment, but I think that is kind of the purpose of this, and I'm open to comments and suggestions.
Steal this to get it closer. Was this also the sample report that was sent out, Rebecca? From there?
These goals are not the goals for newly generated goals.
Yeah, I like the sample report format. My suggestion for consideration is that we maybe get a little bit more specific. My concern is if the goals are too general, and they don't have some timeframes or targets, then we'll end up with a task force report. And I wrote this down as an example. I picked this one for Jonathan. I'd like to tie the assessment to the goals and then the tactics. So residential providers are experiencing an ongoing direct support staff vacancy rate of X percent, 18%. So that's our assessment. We've got an issue with workforce, and it's expected to continue for the next 3 to 5 year period. So due to that assess factor, it's recommended that adult foster care or structured family caregiving, that we grow that model from, it's about 5%, it's about 0.5% of the people in services now, that we grow that to the national average, which is closer to 5%. So I just think it would be good if we had some targets. So I like the format. I think that makes sense. That was my only criticism of the Arizona one. It was like it was so global. I don't know how we would measure if we're successful or
Anyone
not.
else? Are we restricted to the number of boxes here, or?
No,
Okay.
this is a sample.
Perfect.
What, you got a box for me?
In my mind, I know that sometimes we restrict to ensure that successful implementation, if you had 50 in one column, then it might be too burdensome. And I didn't know if we were shooting for a target goal to make sure we could actually wrap our arms around, our funding around, and our time frames to successfully implement.
I was just thinking, I kind of like Steve's idea. I think what we could do, though, easily enough is in looking at the objectives under each goal, like increase the number of individuals who are employed, we could devote one page, perhaps, of a report to laying out where we are now, how it's changed maybe over time, if that's relevant, and then some of the recommendations we might have to improve the situation, so that each one of these items underneath the big goal has a page that goes with it that can further explain our thinking and the information we've collected in that area. So I think that would work really well. But I really love the graphic design and it's easy, it's laid out, it's easy to see quickly. And then for the details, you could go to the other pages.
No, I think, Christine, your point is very valid. I think, and the sample report that was, our team within FSSA really went to all 50 states and identified any type of strategic plan or any type of, a lot of them are from a DD council, a lot of them even from a similar situated task force. And so what I was looking at was just a structure for something for you guys to react to. This is really an ability to kind of say, here is where we need to go with the acknowledgement that we're looking at a 10-year plan. I think where it makes sense, I think we absolutely tie appropriate targets and dates. I think we can embed data, as Christine had mentioned, that also obviously meets the statutory requirements of the report, but also puts it in a relevant place that makes sense for the report. And I think we need to be cognizant of it being a 10-year plan. It also is in consumer or individual centric, so that they feel that they can understand it and they feel it is done in a manner that they can see the vision of the 10 years moving forward.
Does the state have a standard format for strategic planning? Because I'm hearing us really talk about the formatting and such things, and I couldn't concur with you more, Steve, about we have to marry this with the metrics. We have to look at what data we've collected as baseline from the data group and all of that, because we'll never know, if the after is better than the before, right, for any intervention. So I guess I would encourage us, rather than create a format and a document and such that's unique to this work, the more consistent we can be with what already exists with the state. It won't be a stick-out plan. It'll just be a plan that needs to be in line with other areas of need.
Yeah, so I would concur. I think I need the task force additional input with respect to appropriate metrics with regarding any type of white papers or where we want as the final outcome. But absolutely tying and embedding those metrics are critical so that we can see any type of movement or non-movement in the next 10 years, and so that we can get appropriate even buy-in, I think, from other agencies and organizations to rally to kind of move in that direction.
And the only thing I guess I would caution is that we realize this is a 10-year plan. So we don't say, well, within 2 years we want this done, and within 4 years we want this done, because so much of it may depend upon the administration, and it may depend upon appropriation. So I want us to just be concerned about being too specific with timetables, and this has to be done by this particular date. It's a 10-year plan. So I like your idea, Steve, of, we need to get closer to this percentage and not saying it has to happen by this. I think this is to start the discussion and to kind of provide a framework where Derek can start writing the report and submitting it to us after every meeting. So we aren't waiting to the very end to get a report and then try to figure out if that's everything we want and run out of time to be able to really come up with a report that we are proud of. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
So maybe I would just open it up to if you guys have comments or additional identifications of how to improve this sample. Why don't you feel free to email? Is it appropriate to collectively the group? And we can digest that within the next time frame for the next meeting and provide some further feedback with actual content related to the task force.
Now, have we asked Derek, have we asked you to draft a kind of a sample for the next meeting, or is that something, sounds like that's an ask, but, all right, so that the input that you all can provide on, we think this kind of framework needs to change or reflect this or that, the sooner would be helpful, so that Derek has time to make those kind of changes and get that into the report. Yeah, do y'all have any feedback on the goals themselves? I mean, I know that you had said specific, I couldn't agree more, Steve. I think this, the specifics will get into what comes under the goals. Are these 4 goals encompass everything? Is there another goal you all are thinking needs to be on there? Because the goals probably should be pretty general. It's everything under the goals that's going to be more specific.
I assume that as we continue our conversations, we will want to add more goals. And I don't think this was the intent that this was the final 4, but I'm sure that they will
We're
add
okay
more.
with this for starting.
Absolutely.
Add the litmus test for any of these goals is how it aligns with our vision.
Very good. Thank you, Kylie. We have an updated agenda. I think, Rebecca, you've included that in the package, and we've tried to update the agenda for the duration of the task force to include the white paper topics that were suggested at the last meeting, so we tried to place them appropriately, and let us know if there are any additional topics that you would like to prepare white paper on. We still have time to present for consideration by the task force. And do any of you see your white papers placed somewhere that you think they need to be placed differently? I know, Jonathan, you came up with. No? All good? Yes, Steve.
One suggestion that may help is to put the name of the task force member who's doing that.
So they remember?
Yes. You've found me out.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. Anything else on the updated agenda? All good? How about proposed data and white paper procedures? We're going to review and discuss the proposed data and the white paper procedures. Is that Kylie, you? Is that Rebecca?
So this was put together to sort of build off of what Kylie was discussing in terms of a framework for the eventual report and gathering the information that task force members may be submitting and that the state may be presenting. So we put together the statutory requirements are listed on there. We've identified some of the data sources that we've already received from Julie Reynolds at the previous meeting. And then we talked about procedures for white papers. The suggestion was that the task force will consider the white paper a recommendation from a white paper. So a topic or a recommendation as an initiative or an objective, not adopting the white paper wholesale in its entirety. But taking that as sort of a jumping off point to develop a recommendation or an objective for the 10-year plan going forward. And then the actual white paper itself would be included at the end of the report as an appendix so that whoever's interested could see with the source document when the report is all complete. And then, as we discussed, Dr. Nord will begin to prepare drafts as the task force starts adopting white paper and more data gets presented so that the task force can have something to react to and see and review and start tweaking before you get to the end of your work. So that was the thought behind that. Is the task force comfortable with that process and procedure? Okay.
All right. We could. Sure, let's do an motion to adopt those procedures for the data and white paper. Motion, second? Second, thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And that motion passes, so you can move forward on that. Crisis response, white paper presented at the February 23rd meeting. Kim and Steve. We have a review and discussion of the crisis response proposal and consideration as a recommendation to be included in the report. So we'd like, Steve and Kim, for you all to kind of share a little more information, and then the task force, we should consider whether it's something we want to include in our report.
Sure, and Kim, jump in whenever you want. Actually, what's going around is kind of a combination. The suggestions on the format for a white paper. What you had last time really was just an executive summary. So included in what's going around, we didn't have a chance to get this out in the entire packet, is essentially what a white paper might look like if you followed the guidelines that we just adopted. So forewarning. So again, on crisis, the first page is what you had last time that we looked at. The only addition to that was at the end of that executive summary, there is some information about the costs for the annual contracts last time. So those totaled $7.6 million. And the way that was funded, 95% of the individuals served were individuals that were already Medicaid recipients. And so that allowed the state to draw the 50% Medicaid match, Medicaid administration match. So the cost of that was approximately $3.9 million to the state. So obviously you had 5% that weren't Medicaid recipients, so you couldn't claim that. So it's not a straight 50-50 split. So that was not provided last time. And again, that is simply meant as an example. It's a good reference point because that's what the contracts were on an annual basis. So again, the state share was $3.9 million. If you go on to the paper itself, I just want to highlight a few things. One of the topics to be covered is how many individuals would be served. We talked about the fact that there's about 36,000 people in some type of service right now, individuals with intellectual disabilities. That's about 36% of how many folks we think have an intellectual disability. Between 07 and 010, the state had a competitive bid process, and there were two different contracts, and the companies and the amount of their contracts are highlighted in there. The crisis program was available. During that 3-year period, 1,900 individuals were served. So again, I think that gives us the best reference point possible. We have 3 years of actual experience about the number of people that were served. That's 55 people a month being referred for crisis. Sorry about that scary number, Kylie. That number probably doesn't surprise you, though. So again, a little bit of information about the people that were being served. One thing that is different is the prior crisis experience was if you were intellectually disabled, it really didn't matter where you were, group home, living with your family, on a waiting list, or just the person that picked up and called the phone, the 1-800 toll-free line, you were eligible for service. And so the nature of service last time in the RFP were the kinds of things that we talked about, a toll-free hotline, in-home services, and out-of-home services. If you go on to waiting lists, well, there was no waiting list for crisis services. Practically speaking, if you're going to have a crisis program and your response is within an hour or within 24 hours, waiting lists here is not a concept I think that would be applicable. Needed services, again, those were detailed. Where people are waiting, again, no waiting list. Certainly there's an opportunity for collaboration and that stress. The analysis of need, a little bit more detail there. Again, a couple of things that we didn't talk about. 35% of the folks with intellectual disabilities have a co-occurring mental health issue. That's according to the National Core Indicator Project. Indiana participates in that. So there's some additional statistics and citing. The characteristics nationally about who accesses crisis intervention programs are right there. Probably not a surprise. Younger folks tend to be the folks that access this kind of services. And so again, some data on who might access it. If you go on to the next page, in terms of experience, this is, I think, very important. About a third of the cases Indiana experienced in the 3 years they ran this program were actually handled with technical assistance on the phone. About 55% of those 1,900 folks got phone and in-home support. And I think relatively good news, only a very small percentage, 15% of those individuals actually required any brief out-of-home supports. And that is something I would think crisis programs would strive for. In the costs, there are 3 models here. The Vermont model, which is in essence every waiver provider devotes a small amount of their reimbursement to a statewide crisis program. caution on that one is it's only available to waiver consumers. And so in our case, that would leave some folks out. Funded as a waiver service, you could actually put it inside a waiver and fund it as a waiver service. Indiana had some experience in 2002 and 2004. Again, it only served people on the waiver, so you left out a significant part of the population that might access a service. And then the last model is the one that Indiana actually used, which was a very much like a contracting model. So again, this puts us in a white paper format with the kinds of components. I will say I provided all the appendices that go with a white paper. It's this thick. I provided a copy to Kylie and to Rebecca. There are 185 pages. This has the original RFP, a study on outcome measures, which was very important. In other words, if a person doesn't call the police and they call the crisis program, I think it saves $875 per police run. So all of that information is in here. I'm not sure that the task force would necessarily enjoy 183 pages, but nonetheless, I sent it to Rebecca electronically, and if she chooses, it can go out to everyone. So, but again, that kind of puts it in the white paper format. Kim, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that?
Steve, can I input? And I want a clarification. The procedure we adopted, that's not a format for the white paper and how it looks, correct? It is a process for how the white paper gets processed through our committee, correct? So
yeah, although it kind of worked for the format because it tells you everything you need to know.
I didn't want other people to think that this beginning, this A through F, that's just your restating of the task force statute, correct? Okay, and not a format that has to be followed for white papers, correct? Okay, just check. Trying to save you a little work, Steve, in the future.
Yeah, I should say this wasn't all my work. Sarah Chestnut from our staff. Yeah, helped a great deal.
No, the only thing I will add to that, because I think Steve went through it, is just the strong need that exists. On a weekly, if not daily basis, the ARC certainly gets calls about crisis cases occurring. And so I would hope that the committee would give serious consideration about including this in the report, because I do think that it's something that is facing families and providers on a daily basis. Oh, and then I would also add, a few years ago, the state did do a study with the University of New Hampshire that I would want to make sure that we included our findings from that as the committee talks about it in more seriousness later on this year.
I truly appreciate the effort and the research and the time that you put into this and getting us all the information. I mean, I also think that if you emailed the 185 pages, so that if anyone else is interested, or do we have a place where members can go and access files if they want to? Would that be helpful if we had just kind of that you all could go and you could access information that's presented that maybe you don't want to fill up your email with, but you could at least go do that. So if we could work on that, and then we can make that available, all that 185 pages. Go ahead.
Steve, Kim, I have a question. Being in a provider group, I've heard a lot of people discuss further behavior supports as possibly being able to drive down some of the crisis need. Do we have any information on that? And I think I haven't heard from NABC or any other groups that are behavior centric.
Steve's paper referred to that a little bit. I forget what page. I wasn't following along as you went through it, because I went through it last night. But, so yes, I think that is a key component, and I think that many of the behavior consultants around the state would want to make sure that was included because, again, they get brought in on a daily basis as well when that is included.
Absolutely, and I think if you look at effective crisis programs, it's ones that work with existing behavior supports, intensifies them temporarily, may refortify them, follow along, back out, and then hopefully only needs to be there on a periodic basis. But it assumes something that there are good existing intensive behavioral supports, and I think later when we talk about residential and day service options, I think there's opportunities for improvement of those.
So, questions or thoughts or responses? Because what I'd like for us to do, the next step is to actually consider and vote on. I like the wording at the bottom of page 1, just that final paragraph. What do you think, Steve and Kim? So the recommendation would be that Indiana establish a statewide IDD crisis program utilizing all available federal funding and as needed required state funding. I don't know if we want to say all the following best practices. I don't know, you all tell me. To me, less is best, but
can I suggest something?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, suppose we put that underneath goal, what would it be? Probably 4. That could be a recommendation under goal 4, as far as similar to invest in direct care staff training. And then we have a page that would go into it further and talk more about the details. That's the way I would see it, as possibly formatting out.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So just have kind of a brief, yes, and then you would have the supporting embedded within the report, and then even appendix. Yeah, Jonathan.
Another question I had for Steve is, did you see any increased need for crisis assistance paired with the opioid epidemic, or is that data too new to really be able to wrap our heads around yet?
Data from 2007, 2010 wasn't influenced by the opioid crisis. I wanted to concur with the Lieutenant Governor's suggestion that maybe less is better for the actual recommendation. Eventually, the program design really is something that would be with a division. So the concept that we need our assessment is there's a need for crisis assistance, we should have it, would be a task force recommendation. But when it gets into the actual program design, the white paper would only serve as a resource for Kylie and her staff.
How would you word that recommendation? Indiana establish a statewide IDD crisis response program utilizing all available federal funding and as needed / required state funding with best crisis practice components?
Would say that suffices.
Perfect.
Maybe just one thought.
Okay.
I realize the scope of our task force focuses on the IDD population, but the state may have an interest to expand this to other populations as well. So maybe just keeping that in mind, that there may be a cooperative effort with other divisions in bringing the service statewide.
More time and then we'll vote. Left, Kim reread.
The 1102 Task Force should consider including a recommendation that Indiana establish a statewide IDD crisis response program utilizing all available federal funding, including Medicaid, HCBS waiver, etc., and as needed required state funding with crisis best practice components.
Is there a motion to accept that? Second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Yay! Get to my right thing on my agenda. We're on the early intervention first steps. Perfect. What we've been waiting for. Thank you. And Christina Common will be doing our presentation along with several other people. So Christina will start.
Projector kind of warms up here. I'll kind of introduce myself. My name's Christina Commons. I am the First Steps Director for the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services. I've been in this role for about 20 months now, but who's counting? Just to give you a little background about where I came from, I'm a provider. I'm a developmental therapist. I graduated from Purdue University and went to work for Noble of Indiana immediately after college to become an early interventionist for First Steps. I worked for them for several years before starting my own company. I owned Therapy Solutions, LLC as a developmental therapist and was an independent business owner for about 10 years. At which time the state restructured the early intervention program and found myself in need of a home. And I found that with ProKids as an assessment team member. I spent 3 wonderful years there and then moved to the state of Indiana where I worked for the Division of Mental Health and Addiction for a couple years and then was asked to take this role in September of 2016. So super thrilled to be here today. I'm very passionate about early intervention and my job as the director, and I'm super excited to give you some background information about our wonderful program. So just to give you a brief overview of Part C and the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA. Indiana's early intervention program is First Steps. With the federal government, we're called Part C, lovingly, and I am the Part C director for our program. And in Indiana in 1996, we started that program, and it's called First Steps. We are a federally entitlement program under IDEA, and we are federally overseen by the Office of Special Education Programs. We are an early intervention. Our early intervention is a system of coordinated services designed to help infants and toddlers with developmental delays or disabilities. Congress established Part C of IDEA in 1986 to enhance the development of infants and toddlers with disabilities. We reduce educational costs by minimizing the need for special education through early intervention, and we minimize the likelihood of institutionalization to maximize independent living and to enhance the capacity of all families to meet their children's needs. And collectively, there are 58 Part C programs nationally. And there truly are 58 very different Part C programs nationally. None of us look the same. We all implement the federal guidelines in a very different way. So just to give you a little bit of background around our First Steps system structure and our eligibility to be part of First Steps, you must be between the ages of birth and 3 years. which sounds like a very long time, and I think for many parents out there it might be, but in the life of First Steps, it's such a very short time. To be eligible, you must demonstrate a developmental delay, 25% delay in one area or 20% in 2 or more domains, or demonstrate a high probability of developmental delay with either a chromosomal abnormality, a neurological disorder, congenital malformation, sensory impairment, severe toxic exposure, low birth weight or less than 15,000 grams, 1,500 grams, a neurological abnormality during the newborn period. Our service delivery structure, we're divided into 9 service regions that we lovingly in Indiana call clusters. Each region is managed by a nonprofit fiscal agent, which is awarded through a request for proposal process. Each of those clusters is required to have a system point of entry, which is part of that nonprofit fiscal agent that I spoke of, which does the following. They receive referrals, they maintain intervention records, they employ service coordinators, they manage assessment teams, and oh, so much more. We have 38 provider agencies statewide, which employ our ongoing providers. And what's not mentioned here is that we also have a number of independent providers who just subcontract with the state of Indiana to provide such services as audiology, transportation, medical services, social work, psychology, etc. In Indiana, I see our office as the Indiana First Steps Early Intervention System, and then we have about 4 structures immediately under that, called our Systems Point of Entry, which again do all of our public awareness, our referral and intake process, our evaluation and assessment, our IFSP development service, and service coordination. We have our early intervention service provider agencies and our independent providers. Our agencies employ developmental, occupational, physical, and speech therapists. Some of them have social workers and psychologists as well. And then, as I mentioned before, our independent providers. We also work with a central reimbursement office. Currently, we have a contractor with our vendor called CSC that does fund recovery for us. They do provider enrollment and credentialing. We have a provider account module, so our agencies can send in our SPOs can create authorizations, and our agencies can send in billings to that database. And then they also host our ISPO, which is our case management system. And then we also work with Indiana University, who does our professional development and our program evaluation and federal reporting. And as I mentioned before, the services that we provide are physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, developmental therapy, deaf and hard of hearing services, vision services, social work, psychology, nursing, medical services, transportation, interpreter services, audiology, nutrition, health services, and assistive technology. And as I talk later, you're going to notice that we essentially have 4 services that we really provide in Indiana, and those are those first 4 services. Because of the way that we are writing our individualized family service plans, we find ourselves with a shortage of the remaining services. Some of that has to do with the way that we're writing those plans, and others is the fact that we just cannot pay them what other sectors are paying for those jobs. We also work with families as soon as they come into our program on a smooth transition for exiting our program. As I mentioned earlier, 3 years is really a very short period of time, and we want to chart a trajectory for a really smooth transition for families as they move in and out of our system. First Step strives to empower parents. As you heard earlier today through Andrea Gilkinson, we do that from the very beginning. We're working with and alongside parents to be strong advocates for their children. We need to start early discussing with parents their hopes and dreams for their children, what your short and long-term goals are, And how do we start charting the good life for children and families from the beginning? Early intervention is a wonderful time to start. First Steps is working, as all of DDRS, on bringing the life course tools and framework to parents early on so they can transfer or transition from First Steps, and that they're prepared and armed with effective ways to discuss their goals for their children, no matter the setting. This is our First Step system point of entry in our cluster map. I'd also like to take an opportunity to discuss with you our state-level First Steps partnerships. The First Steps office has worked quite hard over the past year and a half to build and strengthen relationships with our own FSSA, as well as our sister state agencies. We were really missing from the table at many key meetings and initiatives, and we can proudly say that we are now not just present, but are fully supporting and integrated into a variety of early childhood initiatives. For instance, with the Indiana State Department of Health and their Children's Special Healthcare Services, Director Shirley Payne now was reappointed to the Interagency Coordinating Council. We also interact with Women, Infant, and Children program. Their outreach manager, our outreach manager, Connie Young, and a nutritionist, Karen Glander, recently attended a WIC meeting down in Franklin, Indiana, where they provided them information on the First Steps program, the importance of nutrition, and on early infant brain development. Our maternal and child health sector of the Indiana State Department of Health and their maternal, infant, early childhood home visiting program, the Federal Office of Special Education Programs, and the Health Resources and Social Services Administration recognized our collaboration across 3 state agencies. They interviewed us and asked us to participate in a national summit on home visiting. These programs with the State Department of Health are the Nurse Family Partnership and Healthy Families Indiana. We also are partners in the Early Childhood Comprehensive Systems Grant. First Steps is only one of many partners collaborating with ISDH and the Bonner Center in Indianapolis to improve child outcomes, including infant mortality and overall child development. This effort is both on a state and local level. Lessons learned could have an enormous impact on our policy development, program implementation, and best practices. We're also involved in Help Me Grow with the Indiana State Department of Health. First Steps is excited to be a partner with ISDH and DCS in bringing Help Me Grow to Indiana. For those of you who don't know, Help Me Grow is an early childhood framework that supports a comprehensive, cross-sector, integrated system to support parents and caregivers in gaining knowledge in early childhood development. The understanding of screening, referral to early intervention, and other childhood programs as appropriate, as well as follow-up. This framework, while only one strategy, is a real game changer for the First Step program and the children and families in Indiana. This comprehensive cross-sector system is necessary to ensure that all families are sufficiently supported to promote optimal health and development. Help Me Grow Indiana is scheduled to be launched September of 2018 in 9 pilot counties: Lake, LaPorte, St. Joseph, Elkhart, Grant, Delaware, Madison, Marion, and Scott. These counties are those that are currently funded with MCV dollars, and as well as Nurse Family Partnership and Healthy Families Indiana. We know that the launch of Help Me Grow will have an impact on First Steps. However, the extent of this impact is unknown at this time. We look forward to sharing more data on this program as it progresses. The Infant Perinatal Quality Improvement Collaborative, IPQUIC, and the Infant Medical Home Work Group. I currently sit on that work group, and it's focused on developing a protocol for infants who have experienced prenatal substance exposure who are moving from hospital to home. It's important for First Steps to be involved in these discussions due to our eligibility. However, it is equally important for us to remember that many of these infants may need early intervention, but might not need those typical services that I was talking about earlier. They might need social work. They might need psychology services. They might need medical services. They might need intensive feeding services. And mom will also need assistance as well. So how do we wrap those services around her? We also work with the Department of Child Services and our Child Welfare Department. We have a CAPTA MOU, and the Child Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Act requires that First Steps receive a referral for all substantiated abuse and neglect cases for any child under the age of 3. We also work with our prevention partners at DCS, both with Healthy Families Indiana and their Help Me Grow initiative. The Indiana Department of Education and their Part B program, Christy Wright and I have been involved in a leadership institute with the Early Childhood Personnel Center, and we're working to coordinate our transition services for young children. We're working to build a coordinated and consistent state system for children and families around transition, where families consistently transition so frequently from one early childhood system to another. And wouldn't it be great if it was consistent no matter what door you entered? And then we also work within our own FSSA. One moment. The Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning and their On My Way Pre-K campaign. We're making sure that all families with children under the age of 5 understand that program and have access to it. We're working with their Training Central program, so our providers have access to professional development opportunities in a virtual learning setting. We're also involved in their Early Learning Advisory Committee work groups. My staff and I attend those monthly. We also work with our sister agency, the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, on their Children's Mental Health Awareness Committee, their Systems of Care efforts, their early childhood mental health consultation efforts, and their parent cafes. We're also working very heavily with Medicaid and our Department of Family Resources. It's so important that we recognize that First Steps is just one small piece of this greater early childhood system. We are but one program where families can receive high-quality, individualized, family and child-centered early intervention services to prepare our children for a lifelong success. It will take all of our agencies, programs, grants, etc., to come together to affect child outcomes and have an impact for all children and families in Indiana. Now we'll talk to you a little bit about First Step Services data. If I can turn the pages in my report here. Maybe? All right. So just to give you an idea of the number of children that we serve annually, I gave you data from 2012 to 2017. Our program has grown over time. We currently, I think the data in front of you is children with an IFSP and then also regardless of an IFSP. And just to give you a definition of that, the annual count of children served regardless of IFSP is the unduplicated number of children who receive services during the reporting period, regardless of IFSP, and that includes assessment and evaluation as well as treatment services. So in 2017, we saw 24,838 children walk through our door. And of those 24,000, we wrote IFSPs for 20,775 children. Here's the, oh, sure, I'm sorry. They were not found eligible or in need of services. That doesn't mean that we didn't help them try and find a home elsewhere. I think that, again, goes to the importance of why our relationships with other agencies and programs is so very important. The needs of our families are very vast. It doesn't always include early intervention, but it may be something else. And our service coordinators do a wonderful job getting them to those services.
Christina, if we went back further than 5 years, does the slope of that line look more dramatic in terms of the increase?
No, it does not. It actually, I think in 2011, goes up a little bit. And the increase is really, that we're seeing is really from 2015, 2016, and 2017. And the cost of our system is going up as well, so I have later slides that go on to talk about the fiscal impact of this increase. I think what is important is maybe just the number of children that we're writing IFSPs for. So if you look at this, this kind of gives you the growth of our program over time. The blue line is what you didn't get in the slide before, which is actually our referrals. So 27,952 children were referred to First Steps last year. Every single one of those children were touched by a service coordinator in our program. 17,416 of them received an intake, which means we actually went out to their home and gathered information, and then 11,142 of them were found eligible and in need of service.
Clarification question then.
Sure.
So, again, I'm going to just basically break it down in my head. So 27,000 children were referred to you. So is there like 10,000 then where the parents didn't respond to?
It's possible that they didn't respond to us.
Okay, all right. And referrals come from lots of different areas, but primarily doctors?
Doctors are one of our highest referral sources, next to parents. Parents hear about our program from other parents. They also hear from their doctor and are encouraged to call us. We also, our Department of Child Services is a huge referral source for us, and other social service agencies as well. Were there any other questions before I move on? Okay. So this is the best substance exposure referral data I have access to. And there are a number of reasons. One is we weren't expecting an opioid crisis, and our data collection system is not prepared to collect that kind of data. And the children who are being referred to us from their NICU or their physician or from any other source are not coming with the proper ICD-10 codes for us to determine the substance exposure. Typically, we get a referral that just talks about what developmental issue that child is experiencing. For instance, they're not sucking on a bottle, and so they get sent to us with a dysphagia ICD-10 code rather than the substance exposure ICD-10 code, or just a developmental delay code. And so we're not able to capture that data accurately at this time. So, well, part of that group with the Infant Perinatal Substance Use Committee through ISDH, part of that protocol from infants moving from the hospital to home, one of those is that we get the proper ICD-10 code for that, and that we're asking for the substance exposure code so we can better track that. They can include other codes such as the feeding issues and the developmental delays, but we really want that ICD-10 code related to the substance use to be connected with that child so we can better track it. Currently, that group is in discussions on how we're going to require that, but right now it's just on a form that will be moved with that child to their medical home. Well, but then, yes. I mean, our system can capture that data now if it comes to us properly, but we hadn't been getting that. Absolutely.
Nina?
Of course.
What is the definition of substance exposure? Is there a singular definition, or?
Currently, I can tell you from my experience on that task force with ISDH and their 23 pilot hospitals, I believe, that are testing cords. They're testing cords for, I think, up to 10 different toxic substances. They're changing the list, over time, like updating it as to what drugs are currently out there, and revising that testing. But in terms of toxic exposure, it's if that child was exposed to something toxic prenatally.
I guess what I was asking was if it was purely toxicology, like you're referencing, or if it was social exposure as well in an environment which had substance abuse.
Okay. For the purposes of our eligibility, it would only be the toxic exposure, ingestion, or prenatal exposure. It could be postnatal exposure as well, but it would not necessarily be documented as substance use if it were just an environmental, like if their parent was an addict and we received that, or had substance use disorder and we received that referral. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? Sure.
Christina, could you go back to the form for a minute? And I just want to make sure I understand that. Who is it that needs to put the code on that form? I guess another way of saying, whose behavior are we trying to change in terms of completing that form so it has the data that you need?
Well, in terms of that specific form for that group, it would be NICU physicians or nurses, or whoever their data entry staff is that's completing that form that the hospital's designated. If you're talking about first steps in general, we just need anyone who is referring a child and they know that they were exposed to substances and have a diagnosis of that code comes with them to our, through our door. Does that answer your question? So really, we're trying to change everyone's behavior. Yeah. So this is the number of CHINS cases filed, or Children in Need of Services cases that were filed in Indiana from 2011 through 2016. The reason 2017 is here is because it has preliminary data and it's not ready publicly yet. Not all of their counties had turned in their information yet. So, but as you can see, from 2011 through 2016, our cases have almost doubled over time. As I mentioned earlier, we are required to get a referral for all children who are subject of a child abuse and neglect case. This has really sent our referrals skyrocketing. Last year alone, we received a referral from our Department of Child Services for over 8,000 children. Just to give you an idea of how our kids are doing in early intervention, our state has to provide the Office of Special Education Services a state systemic improvement plan. I think it was back in 2013, we decided that we were going to focus on outcomes for children. We especially wanted to focus on social emotional outcomes for young children, especially those from minority families and those who are lower socioeconomic status. So this just gives you kind of a snapshot of how our children are doing compared to the last column, which is nationally. This is how our children are transitioning out of First Steps. Gives you information by race. Again, we continue to work to improve this data outlined in our state systemic improvement plan. We are trying to improve family engagement through family outcomes, especially social emotional development, increasing a focus on those outcomes, again, for those minority families and those through low socioeconomic status. I think it's pretty astounding that 17% of our African American families are leaving because they did not want to participate anymore. So we're trying to improve that as well. Some of the reasons are because we're not connecting with families well enough. We're working to improve our cultural competency when we go into those homes. We need to diversify our workforce. Here's transition data by income. Our high income white families have fewer children transitioning to special education services. They stay more engaged, and our families who are low socioeconomic economic status, I'm having trouble saying that today, I'm sorry, and our black families are dropping out of services. Or they go on to need more social special education services through the school system. And again, last year we implemented a family assessment to improve that family engagement piece. We improved our IFSP so we can hopefully write more authentic, individualized child outcomes. We initiated a robust professional development system to increase cultural competency, improved home visiting practices, improved family engagement, and introduced our child assessment training to improve fidelity around that assessment tool that we use to track child progress and outcomes.
The data going across the bottom, is that percent of federal poverty or?
Yes.
Okay.
And now the stuff that you're all waiting for is our fiscal data, right? So just to give you some information about how we do fund recovery in Indiana First Steps. We implement a pay and chase model. So what does that mean? Our providers send in they actually render services to children and families, and then they send us a claim for those services. We utilize our central reimbursement payment office. They process those claims and then pay our providers what they render, the cost of those services that they rendered. And then we go and chase down the payment for those services. We utilize private insurance, Medicaid, TANF funding or temporary assistance for needy families, and a family cost participation fee. These are all the revenue sources and the figures for state fiscal year 2017. We utilize federal Part C funds, state Part C funds, private insurance, state and federal Medicaid, TANF, state and federal TANF, pardon me, and social services block grant and family participation fees. Are there any questions about? Okay.
So of the $845,000 for family cost participation, do you have any idea if it costs you more or less to get that money from families?
No. But we're hoping that our fiscal analysis gets to that. We did implement in November an online payment system for families. Previously, families were having to send a check or money order to pay us to Kansas, where our central reimbursement office is located. And in November, we implemented an online payment system for families that was at no cost to the state. It's been hugely successful. I went back and compared November 2016 to November of 2017, and so on through February. So I looked at February of 17, in February of 18, and we brought in $10,000 more than we did in the February previous to that. We did reach out to families to find out if that system was working for them, what they liked. Those families who did utilize it, what did they like about it, what didn't they like about it. They had lots of wonderful things to say about the ease and its use, and the same users are coming back to use it as well as others. The average payment made on that system is around $100. So the families whose copays are $3 for a month are likely not the families that are utilizing that system.
Yes. What is the cost of chasing down the dollars to the state? So for every dollar you chase down, what's the cost per dollar on that?
We don't know that yet. We're working on that. That's part of our fiscal analysis. So this is the amount of money that we've spent on behalf of children annually. This includes, this does not include our service coordination. This is only for the services that we pay through our central reimbursement office. And as you can see, we continue to increase.
Christina, on the previous slide, I tried to add this up, which is a challenge. I'm guessing 50 million, 51 million. And on your next slide, it's 40-some million.
That's what was spent on behalf of children.
So
this actually includes all of our revenue and goes to the administration of the program as well.
So that gap of 10 million covers the
salaries of state staff, our contracts with our central reimbursement office, our systems point of entry, Indiana University, any other administrative costs that our program incurs.
Do you have that broken down anywhere? Just might be interesting data for the task force to look at.
I did not put that in this slideshow, but I have access to it that I could certainly share. So this is actually just the amount spent on services for children annually. Yeah.
We're done with the main presentation now, right? Because I wanted to go back to the services provided that you were talking about earlier in the slideshow.
I'm going to get to it, I promise.
Okay.
I have a couple more slides, and I think that one of the slides is what you're looking for. So again, this is the total paid for services in state fiscal years 2017 and what source paid for those services. We have a large number of families who are eligible for temporary assistance for needy families, and that's why we receive so much from them. This is the amount that we spent per service type in 2017, with the most being for speech therapy. The other related services there at the bottom that you can barely see, but just see the dollar figure, I think should be higher. But we don't have enough service providers to provide those services. So our developmental therapists do a lot of that work. It does say that we have $0 spent on vision services. That's not completely accurate. And the vision service definition for us is a certified like ophthalmologist. We provide vision services through a developmental therapist who has vision impairment service expertise. So that's in the developmental therapy ring, as well as our hearing impaired services. David, did you have a question? You're looking at me. Okay.
Christina, the four services that cost the most are all Medicaid covered services. Do you have a breakdown of how many of the children you serve are Medicaid eligible?
No, but I can tell you about off my head that it's about 53% are enrolled in Medicaid.
Thank you.
And about 75% of them are eligible for temporary assistance for needy families. And this is the number of children that received each type of service. So again, it says that we didn't serve anyone for vision, but we did. It's just embedded under DT. We just call them DTs with vision impairment specialty. And only 382 children receive nutrition services. I think we have about 4 nutritionists that serve our program statewide. With the increased opioid epidemic, I see that that's probably going to need to be increased, as well as our social work services. So since I started 20 months ago, we started taking the fiscal pulse of First Steps. In 2017, my team and I sat back, we took a hard look at our early intervention system, and we noticed that many of the frustrations that our providers and stakeholders were expressing could be traced back to infrastructure. As a new team, we began to plan for the future and created a strategic plan. We came up with 2 main objectives that needed to be addressed. One, we wanted to build an infrastructure within First Steps, setting a strong foundation for an effective and efficient system that supports innovation. We want innovation around service delivery and case management, policy revisions to support innovation, modernized case management through technology and support. 2, we want to conduct a comprehensive analysis of First Steps funding in order to support and sustain a strong early intervention system. We wanted to have a funding analysis, a cost analysis, a rate analysis, a data analysis to determine what data we have and what data we need to support all funding tasks. We knew that we could build nor sustain a strong early intervention system without first knowing and understanding the fiscal health of the system. We began to discuss a plan around fiscally analyzing the program. We worked with FSSA and DDRS leadership to identify what we saw were the gaps and found an entity that understood the complexities of IDEA Part C early intervention. Public Consulting Group was identified as the entity with this experience. They have completed fiscal analyses for at least 10 other Part C programs, and the First Steps fiscal analysis kicked off on January 1st of 2018 and will conclude June 30th of 2018. So what is the purpose of this fiscal analysis, you ask? It's to provide a comprehensive analysis of our finance system. Those questions that you were asking me earlier, we don't know. No one here at the state office was here when this was initially set up, and surprise, it's not written down. We need to do a review and analyze our current finance system. We need to know what our program costs are, what our expenditures are, what our system policies and processes are. We need to prepare recommendations for system changes and improvements. We need to review existing revenue sources, and we need to identify strategies for maximizing funding. So what are the desired outcomes of our fiscal analysis? As a new team, we need a better understanding of all First Steps revenue sources and expenses associated with the program in order to improve the program's fiscal administration and health. And this will be accomplished through a comprehensive revenue payment methodology and fund recovery system analysis. We will develop revenue source utilization plan based on the research and stakeholder input. We actually just wrapped up a rate time cost study that will capture the time, effort, and expenses associated with provider service delivery. We need fiscal responsibility so we can attain system sustainability. Materials that will be developed as a result We need a revenue expansion opportunity. We need identification of any new and potential revenue sources for the First Steps program. We need a utilization plan, revenue estimations. We need the rate time cost study tools, reasonable and sustainable recommendations for compensation for all EI providers, recommendations around policy improvements, and recommendations around fund recovery practices. That was a lot of information. Do you have any questions regarding that?
I have one question. This is probably kind of putting you on the spot, so I don't mean to do that, but in your 20 months that you've been there, knowing what you know, what recommendation would you like to see this task force make that would really, in your mind, allow First Steps to serve more better?
I think we need to understand our evolving population that we serve. We need to understand what families are coming into our program and how to better serve them. We need a plan to retain and recruit providers. We need to make sure that the policy decisions that we're making are benefiting our children and families as well as our providers. We need to come into the 21st century and have everything online and in a web-based system. We currently have a lot of our providers are still using pen and paper. We have people driving files from one place to another. We have a lot of technology needs that need help. We also need we want our providers to stay. They came into the system because they love kids and they love families.
Christina, thank you for the presentation. Well done. Couple of questions. Do you have any information about how old kids are when they first come in? They're obviously 3.
Sure.
And then kind of average length of stay.
Sure.
When I take the 40-some million divided by the number of kids served, it's about 1,600 per child. Is that?
Yes, that's accurate. The average age of referral is 14 months. They stay in our program generally until they turn 3. Yes, Christine?
I had a question too. In some of the earlier testimony from the folks gathered here, it was mentioned that the rate of reimbursement for providers has gone down significantly in a couple of different jumps in the last few years. And the qualifications to provide the services have gone up dramatically as well. So we're paying a lot less, and we're requiring people to have a doctorate in order to provide, I think, physical therapy or maybe some of the other ones as well, but yet we're not reimbursing them at the rate we did just a few years ago. It's less than that. So I would think that would be an obvious, at least to me, it seems an obvious reason why you're not able to get some of these other services covered, and why providers are leaving the program.
Sure. So I just do want to clarify that that's not a First Steps policy that they receive a doctorate degree. That is their license. So we have to follow the physical therapy licensing board in order to employ those therapists. The same is true for an occupational therapist. I believe that they're moving to a doctorate degree as well. The thing that we can change within First Steps that we are working toward are our requirements for developmental therapy, our requirements around professional development, at the same time as maintaining qualified personnel for our system. And then we did implement the rate time cost study recently, and we are anxiously awaiting the results of that. We have a meeting in May with our vendor regarding that study and hope to get some recommendations around that. And they'll be looking at the fair market rates for those, as well as taking into account the amount of time that providers spend with families, both billable and unbillable time.
In your analysis, your pre-analysis, is there anything that's coming to light in regards to streamlining recovery, or you had mentioned increasing potential recovery funding streams? Is there anything that is inhibiting that the task force can help with?
With accessing other funding streams for our program? Yes. I think that we want to be strategic with that message, and I think we want to make sure that this task force is armed with the most accurate information. And I think our fiscal analysis information that we'll be receiving in both May and June will help us put together something to provide to you, so you can provide that to other individuals and lawmakers.
Can you talk more about how you might use the other services that you're not able to fund currently and how those might benefit the families that you serve?
Sure. So in my mind, a lot of these children who are coming into our system, well, and even some of those who are finding our system, families aren't equipped to handle 3 or 4 services provided to them on a weekly basis. And a lot of them have other basic needs that they're trying to meet. And then we're trying to throw physical, speech, occupational, and other variety of therapies at them to improve their child's development. But yet they don't have stable housing. They don't have stable jobs and income. They struggle to put food on the table weekly. They struggle to get to weekly appointments for their children as well as themselves. And so those are the types of services that I'm talking about. Our families need access to more social workers. I think the Division of Mental Health and Department of Child Services can also empathize with that we're not turning out social workers fast enough currently in our current climate. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, Lieutenant Governor. I'm sorry. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today. This was wonderful.
Would it be possible to have the task force, maybe even have Christina come back and work it into agenda to just kind of update us?
Thank you.
Patrick Cochran, the CEO of Sycamore Services here also, and I will ask you the same question that we asked. What would be your recommendation to the task force? I think at the end.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let me start on it. I'm Pat Cochran, I'm CEO of Sycamore Services and have been for the last 22 years. Sycamore Services is a comprehensive provider of services for individuals with IDD, and we've been a children's services provider since our inception in 1961. So we've been doing this a long time. Today I'm kind of a stand-in for Jill Dunn. She couldn't make it here, unfortunately, so I'm here on her behalf. And those of you who know Jill, I'm sure I won't be as articulate as Jill would be in this case, but hopefully my passion will come through just as strong as hers does. I want to say a few things about First Steps. Obviously, very proud to be involved. If you saw the information Christina was putting forward there, we talk about tens of thousands of children who have been served over the years in these families. And it's just, it's a tremendous thing to be involved with, and my small part in it, it's very satisfying to understand and see the things we've been able to accomplish. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the leadership that Kylie and Christina have provided in the last few years as we have moved this forward, and I think this program is best shape it's ever been in. Very thankful for all the therapists and the staff that I work with. I have not met a more dedicated, committed group of people than the therapists who provide these services. They really are, and very happy to work with them. With that being said, there are a few challenges that I think are presented in our current system, and I'd like to address a few of those today. In our trade association, the Indiana Association for Rehab Facilities recently did a survey asking what was the issues in providing first step services, and the number one thing without question was staffing. We have reached a situation where we're becoming non-competitive. Our rates, our salaries for our staff are running our study shows 15 to 20% below the averages. As you can imagine, it's hard to recruit staff to come to you whenever that's the situation. We talk about people who now with OT and PT needing doctorates getting out. So you can imagine this young graduate coming to us, we're trying to convince them to come into the First Steps program. And as you can well imagine, a number of them have considerable debt and they're looking to make money as much as they can, and that's understandable. And so we're trying to convince them to come to work for us, and it's very, very challenging with that situation.
Patrick, what is the average?
The average for
Someone coming in, just being hired in, like the average salary, I'm sorry.
For us or for overall?
For the provider, the people that you're hiring, people that you're actually hiring.
I'd say the average for us is around $60,000 a year. That's my guess. Depending on PT, OT, it depends. It changes somewhat depending on the discipline. Again, it's a very highly competitive job market, and again, I don't think at this time we are competitive. And why is that? Christine has covered some of these, and there were some other questions. In 2002, we experienced a 6% reduction in our rate across the board. 2010 or 11, we experienced a 5% across the board reduction. And at this date, no, we've not had any rate restoration. Just to give you a few more examples, I'm a little bit older than Christine, I can go back a little bit more. In 2002, as reported these state reports, 2002 there were 18,500 children served approximately at a cost of $59 million. And so the average per child was over $3,200. And as you heard a few minutes ago, and we're now serving 25,000 students for around $40 million, and as Steve pointed out, an average of $1,630. So it's been a tremendous change over that time. And we're currently into a business model that just does not work. And as somebody mentioned here earlier, we are challenged to hire more and more part-time staff. They're doing something else, and they're also trying to work part-time for us to provide some of the therapy because of the full-time work in salary is just not enough. So another area of concern that I have is based on the use of prior authorizations. Several years ago, a system was established. I'll kind of walk, you've been through some of this, but here's the way the system works. A referral is made, as you said, that referral can come from any number of services, but that referral is made, and so then we respond, in the First Step system, and an eligibility team then responds to that family to go out and see if they're, and do an assessment to see if that child is eligible for services. And they go through that, and if a child is determined to be eligible, then that same team develops, okay, here's a suggestion or a recommendation that they have for the types of service that child needs, and for the duration of those services and the frequency of those services. Then a service coordinator comes in and meets with that family and says, okay, here's what the ED team determined that you're in need of, and how does this work? And so then there was back and forth, and they come to an agreement, and as Christine was talking about, an IFSP is established. And then that IFSP is given to a provider and saying, this is what we want you to do, and provide this type of service through this discipline to this child at this frequency. One of the challenges that we experience now is with the prior authorization system, if it was determined that child needed PT, let's say, every other week for a year, the authorization we would get would be 26 one-week authorizations. That means each authorization is only good from Sunday to Saturday of each week that it is presented. So if for some reason that child is sick, the family has an issue, somebody's on vacation, it doesn't matter what the reason is, If we miss that appointment during that week, you can't make it up. That's gone. And this system was instituted years ago as a cost-saving measure, and that's really what it is. And so we ask as we're going forward, we look at that, and I know it's a money thing, to be able to look at this and say, isn't there some way to have some flexibility in that? Several weeks ago, as you remember in February, there was a big snowstorm hit on a Friday. I can't imagine how many First Steps therapy sessions were missed that day, and they can't be made up. They're just gone. So I asked to look at that. So as we move forward, earlier somebody said that this was a kind of a terrifying group, and that part doesn't terrify me. You guys don't. What terrifies me is something that was mentioned earlier as well, we've been talking about, is the opioid crisis. And what's that going to mean to services going forward? If you remember in what was put up there, we served 25,000 children last year in First Steps approximately. Okay? Of that number, we really don't know how many were there because of the opioid crisis. We don't have a really good handle on that. But I can tell you a couple of other things. Recently, whenever I was downtown, I was talking to Representative Stairwell, and he had his survey showed that 1 in 3 children throughout the state of Indiana right now are being born with abstinence syndrome. Excuse me, and 1 in 3 children. And so if you take that then, and if you take the number of births in the country, in the state of Indiana last year, was 84,000 births. 1 in 3 is about 25,000 then are being born with a toxic system or stuff in their system, which makes them eligible for First Steps. So I know we can assume that there's 25,000 being born a year, and we're serving 25,000 in First Steps. Those numbers, there's no way that all 25,000 are moving into First Steps. And I'm not trying to say all 25,000 are going to use First Steps program, but they are eligible. And so I just see the number of children being served is just going to increase over time, and we have to be prepared for that. So we have to make adjustments to the program so that we can hire the appropriate staff that we need, and we can have a system that meets the needs of these children. As we talk about this, there's no program that we have that's more important to us. These children's services that are what we do within children's services is the most important thing we do. And we look at it because we all know that early intervention, there's a direct correlation between early intervention. What we can do is as far as that child can, the independence that they can gain and the movements they can make in their abilities in what happens later in life. And so from the standpoint of what we need to do now so that these children have the best advantage of becoming as independent as possible, we need to be able to step forward and address that issue. That's all I have today, and I thank you very much. If you have any questions, what would you say the most? Well, I think it's the same thing with staffing being that issue. I think what Christine was talking about. We have to find a way to be able to change that. The staff we have now, I was talking about, they're so dedicated in what they're doing, but it's hard to attract that staff and it's hard to keep them just because of what we could pay to be able to provide that service.
Barely a question, but NRP used to have 24 members that provided First Steps, and we're down to 12. I appreciate Pat and Jill and our members who stayed with the program and the efforts, but that really does concern me that some of the core providers are getting out of the business, and they're getting out of the business when we need it the most.
I appreciate that, Stephen. If I could add to that, this is a mission-driven thing for us. And if it wasn't, we would have been out a long time ago. Because we have to find a way to subsidize this program each and every year. There's no way with the current setup that it can pay for itself. We have to find other ways to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. Whoa. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I've been with First Step since 1996. Is that feedback? Okay, it's just me that's hearing. Okay. Foundation of the house they now start to build. And we know that if we don't help them build a strong foundation, the likelihood of that house being able to stand the test of time is diminished significantly. We've all heard the statistics. Early intervention services now may mean that these families don't need special education services. They may not need needs or folk rehab services later. We know that early childhood intervention programs have been shown to yield benefits in academic achievement, behavior, and education. Participation in EI services has been shown to reduce delinquency, crime, and increase labor market success. Equally important, we know that well-designed EI services have been found to generate a return to society of up to $17.07 for every dollar spent. If we invest in these children now, we reduce the likelihood that they become recipients of future programs and resources. I remain confident today that Indiana has the foundation of a good, strong system of early intervention. You saw that clearly in Christina's presentation, with the ability to have all of the positive benefits I mentioned. This is because our system runs deep with individuals committed to doing what's needed to ensure that children and families we serve have the best first experience in disability services. This is evident in our system, and it starts with our current state leadership. Christina mentioned she's been with us only 20 months. In that 20 months, we've witnessed her drive and determination. Christina, with support of Kylie and Dart's administration, have worked tirelessly to keep the system strong while planning for its future. In Christina's short time, we've witnessed the development of a strategic plan and a thoughtful execution of a plan intent on building a system that will be strong enough to support our changing population. We've seen Indiana First Steps begin to participate and be recognized once again on the national stage, while simultaneously building those important relationships at the state and local level. Outreach is once again taking place to higher education in an effort to find those providers and engage them in becoming early intervention providers. A once depleted training system has taken on new life, and again, we're training our First Step providers at all levels. For this, we're grateful and hopeful. Strong leadership is important in the best of times. It's particularly important in challenging times. Indiana First Steps has faced and continues to face our share of challenges. We, like most other programs, took the funding cuts in 2011. It was necessary. We understood that. And everyone did their part. Unfortunately, those funds to date. We haven't gone to the level that can withstand the influx of children in need of our services today. You've seen the numbers showing the incoming growth. The number of children being referred from DCS alone has increased significantly. The number of children being referred with toxic exposure is increasing significantly, and Christina mentioned that we don't track that. We haven't been able to track that specifically, but we're working and getting better at identifying those kids. We're working with DCS workers as they make those referrals to identify those kids with toxic exposure when they're making the referrals, so that we can begin to show you those numbers of kids that are coming in with toxic exposure. We're working on going back to those physicians and having them identify that ICD-10 code verbally when they aren't filling it out automatically on that physician's health summary, and asking them to go back and write that ICD-10 code, because we know how important it is to be able to show that these kids are exposed to toxins in utero. Every referral made to the SPO must be accepted. We don't have a we've reached capacity sign that we hang up every month, although there's many months recently that we wish we could. We take those referrals and we must make it work with the resources we have. At the same time, we're working hard to find ways to accommodate every referral and provide them with one of the only entitlement services the law requires, service coordination. Every child coming into First Steps is entitled to service coordination. At the same time, we've increased the demands on service coordinators. We're committed to increasing the quality of services families receive, and this is often done through the service coordinator. We continue to implement practices and policies that are best for the overall system and families. This comes at a cost. We're no longer able to pay our service coordinators a wage that's competitive in the market. This makes recruitment and retention a challenge as well. As a result, we've made service coordination a position that most don't stay in long. We've taken what's likely the most important position in the EI system, the cog that keeps the wheel turning, and made it a position that sees turnover at a much higher rate than is necessary. I'm sure by this point in the day you see there's many moving parts in the First Step system, and in order for the system to work, we all have to work together. We see ourselves as partners in this system. I'm very grateful for Kat's comments, and it's important that he was here today to speak on behalf of agencies. They're vital to the success of the program. We need them to be successful in order for us to be successful. We need providers to be able to be paid a wage that keeps them coming into the system. We can take in all the kids in the world, but if we don't have providers on the other side to treat them, we can only do so much. We need, the lack of funding has not allowed service coordinators, to be paid a competitive rate. As a result of the provider shortage throughout the state, for the first time we're starting to see a shortage in our most populated areas. This was an issue that started in our rural areas, and we've watched it work its way into our most populated areas, where typically the number of providers was more dense, and you were more able to find services in our urban areas more easily than you were in rural areas. And today we're struggling in the most populated areas. I suspect this is a combination of limited providers, increased referrals, and lack of incentive for new providers to enroll in the system. This issue must be addressed, as the state will see the results of our inaction in our future. I hope that what you've gleaned from my remarks is that we do have a strong EI system in Indiana, with strong, committed leadership at the state and local levels, and an unbelievable workforce that goes out every day to every area of our state and travels to bring services directly to children. Our system is full of people who have dedicated their careers to ensuring that our most vulnerable population has the best start possible. I also hope that you see the value in investing in this program, and that you see the importance in spending our time and money now to ensure that our children not only have the best start possible, but that we invest wisely so that our state can see the greatest return in every way. Thank you.
Would you like to see?
I think we're grateful to be heard and to be part of the conversation. I don't think that today, I think the obvious one is to say let's fund the program, but that's the easy answer. I think we're grateful to be part of the conversation. If there were a big broad brush and there was a way that you could fund the program the way it needs to be funded, that would be fantastic. I think there needs to be lots of conversation, and we're grateful to be part of that conversation. I think it's helpful for the solution.
We will now move on to K-12 special education. We have Dr. Pam Wright, the Director of Special Education from the Indiana Department of Education, with us. And thank you for being here, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you for asking me to present today. I hope I can answer all of your questions. If there's anything special that you want me to stop and explain or talk more about, just let me know, and I'll be happy to do that. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I have been in education for more years than I care to count, but I have always been an educator in my professional life, a general education elementary teacher and a special education elementary, middle, and high school teacher, special ed director in Johnson County, Indiana for about 15 years. And then I have been with the State Department now for the last 3.5 years. So that's me in a nutshell. I could go on and on about my grandchildren, but I won't. I won't bore you with that right. Well, it wouldn't be boring, but we'll talk about that another time. Okay, so let's see how this works. All right, just to give you a little bit of information about the legal authority that we have at the department to provide services for students with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA Part B, makes available a free appropriate public education to all eligible children with disabilities ages 3 through 21. The First Steps authority was Part C of IDEA, so this is Part B. Part B governs how states provide early intervention, special education, and related services to infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. That's IDEA, not Part B. That's C and B. And then authorizes formula grants to states to support special education and related services. And then along with the IDEA, we have a state administrative code, which is Article 7, commonly referred to as Article 7. It's Administrative Code 511 IAC 7-32 through 7-49. So that's our legal authority to provide services to students with disabilities. Under that federal provision, our primary responsibility is to ensure a free, appropriate public education to Indiana students with disabilities. Am I the only one getting that feedback, or are you all hearing that too? Maybe I'll step away from the mic a little bit. All right, and as you can see in these puzzle pieces, we have several responsibilities, including developing a state performance plan, providing appropriate policies, procedures, and effective implementation. We do monitoring activities. We have fiscal management responsibilities. We collect data on processes and results. We have improvement, correction, incentives, and sanctions as a result of monitoring activities. We provide effective dispute resolution, and then we provide targeted technical assistance and professional development to schools and parents. In our office, we have a vision for educating all children, particularly those with disabilities, and our vision is that all students are held to high expectations and have equitable access to educational opportunities that enrich their lives and prepare them for future success. So all of our work is focused on this vision for all of the students that we serve in Indiana. To the right is an organizational framework that we have developed with a group of stakeholders that looks at how we can allow every student to succeed and reach this vision. And you can see in the center, it has to do with providing equitable access, and that will equal improved outcomes. Surrounding that is the notion that this is a shared responsibility. We also share accountability, and that we always have high expectations for our students. And then it goes into the components of the framework, which include collaboration, appropriate instruction, assessment, and a core curriculum, quality core curriculum. And then as you can see, the whole framework is hugged by two principles. One is universal design for learning, and then the other is a multi-tiered system of supports. And if we put all of those pieces together, we believe that we can see marked improvements in the outcomes of the students that we serve. We have several priorities in our office. most around improving outcomes, increasing academic achievement, increasing our graduation rate, reducing our dropout rate, improving post-school outcomes, and improving early learning outcomes. And then this is a look at our staffing. We have 18 members of, in our staff that provide all of the monitoring and some of the supports. We have a monitoring team, a fiscal team, and a due process team. And then we contract with several vendors to help us with monitoring and technical assistance. And these are all of the vendors that we currently contract with or have a working partnership with. Some of them we don't provide contracts for, but most of them we do. And in that case, then these technical assistance centers are free to the schools to use to support them. So I'd like to just provide a brief overview of how students access special education services. We start with something called Child Find, and a lot of our students come from Christina's organization, the First Steps organization. At age 3, we get lots of referrals from First Steps, but then we get many referrals from parents and referrals from schools as students move through their grades. So we are required to locate, evaluate, and identify any student who might require special education services. As part of the evaluation, we ask the following questions. Does the child have a disability that requires the provision of special ed related services in order to benefit from education? What are the child's specific educational needs? And what services are appropriate for addressing the needs? I think one of the myths about special education is that any student with a disability would receive special education, and that's not the case. If a student does not require special education in order to benefit from education, then they are not eligible for special education. So, for example, if you have a student who has cerebral palsy, but their only accommodations would be some kind of assistive technology. In any other sense, they're fine to be in general education without any kind of support or modification of classroom education or modification of the services, then they may not need special education. But so it's not only that a child has a disability, it's that they need some supports in order to benefit from their education as well. So we determine the eligibility area. Article 7 identifies 14 different eligibility areas, and I'll talk about those in a couple of minutes. Once they've been identified, the students have been identified as needing special education services, an individual education program is developed by a committee, a multidisciplinary committee, and it's made up of school personnel and parents and any other members who need to be there in order to develop the individual education plan. In that educational plan, we have annual goals, we have descriptions of services, accommodations and modifications, we have progress monitoring, and then we have placement decisions, all within the individual education program. Services are provided in the least restrictive environment, and that means most like their peers as possible. So least restrictive does not always mean the general ed classroom, although we would like, well, it's required that that's the first place that we consider, and that if students are not able to progress within general education with appropriate supports and services, then they may receive some services in a special ed classroom part of the day or special ed classroom the majority of the day. And then the continuum goes all the way to a very restrictive program of day treatment or residential treatment off school grounds. Progress is monitored and reported to the parents, and then the individual education plan is reviewed annually. So those are the steps for accessing special education services. And as I just mentioned, there are several different options on the continuum for least restrictive environment, going from general education classrooms all the way to the most restrictive, which is homebound services. So let's talk about data. Just to give you an idea of our enrollment, it continues to rise every year, not as much as it used to when we first started back in 1975, but this past year, December 1, the enrollment is taken, so December 1 of 2017, we had 162,806 students receiving special education services. The top box shows you the total school enrollment, and then the bottom is the percentage, so we have about 14.6% of our students receiving some kind of special education services. The next slide shows you the different disability categories that I talked about earlier. There are 15 rows on this list, but I counted emotional disability as only one category because for funding purposes it's broken down into full-time and all other, but it's really one category. So between December 1, 2016 and December 1, 2017, our overall numbers increased by 2,550 students. If you look over that list, the areas that seem to be increasing more rapidly than the others are autism spectrum disorder and other health impairments. And we're curious about the other health impairments because that seems to be ratcheting up fairly quickly. And although we don't collect this data, our hypothesis is that a lot of this has to do with the opioid crisis. And we would like to be able to collect more data to see if that is actually the case. The next slide shows you our preschool population. We are required to serve preschoolers ages 3 to 5A, and 5A means children who are 5 before the August 1st cutoff. So we have, in 2017, those numbers increased by 336 students. I imagine we'll see this number continue to increase slowly as well. The more that First Steps can intervene at an earlier age, as you heard earlier, the less likely that a student would then need special education services later on. So we're hoping that that this trend will continue to flatline as we go forward. The highest number of increase in these two areas, or the highest overall, are students with developmental delays. That's not a developmental disability per se, it's a developmental delay, which means that with appropriate services, we're thinking the students can overcome those delays. And then the other area where there's a great deal of increase always is in the language and speech impairment area. Okay, these are some early learning outcomes, and there are 3 areas that we measure for early learning. The first, the blue lines show positive social and emotional skills trends over the last 4 years. The first set of graphs, the first blue lines represent the progress that students made, and then the second set of blue lines shows whether they were within age expectations when they entered kindergarten. So as you can see, students made a great deal of progress, but the percentage of students that were caught up and ready for kindergarten were much lower. The next one that we measure are acquiring and using knowledge and skills. Same thing, lots of progress on using knowledge and skills, but not within age expectations. And then the third one, taking appropriate actions to meet their individual needs, like hygiene, that sort of thing, feeding. A lot of progress, but again, not within age expectations. So this is our statewide assessment data. And as you can see, there is still a fairly significant gap between the students with disabilities who pass both the English language arts and the math portions of the I-STEP versus the general population that passed both English and math on the I-STEP. And if we would break this down into the English separate and the math separate, you'd see the same trend. You'll see that there's a significant drop in scores between 2013-14 and 14-15. That's when the new standards began to be assessed, and they are much more rigorous, and so the actual scores on the assessment dropped, and we've been working in schools quite vigorously to try to improve that. Our challenge is to try to close that gap between kids with disabilities and the general education students. Here's a look at the dropout rate. Again, this time the top line is the special ed dropout rate, and the bottom line is the general ed dropout rate. And you'll see that 4.9% of students with disabilities dropped out in 2017, where only 3.9% of the general education population dropped out. So again, this is a concern for us, the students leaving school before they're ready. This is the graduation trend line. The general ed trend line is at the top, and the special ed trend line is at the bottom. As you can see, again, the graduation rate for general ed is 91% of our students. That's with a high school diploma now. And for special ed, it's only 71. So again, a gap that we would like to see decrease. Is there a question?
Have you ever thought, well, I know you have, but how can we drop that special education rate?
The dropout rate?
The dropout rate, yeah.
Well, I wish I had all the answers. I think that what we are trying to do is work with schools that disproportionately suspend and expel students, and really work on what can we do to keep kids in school, and what can we do to ensure that kids with disabilities are getting the right services so that they don't feel frustrated and drop out of school.
I just look at that as they don't understand when they're doing it, when they're dropping out, but later on in life, it becomes really hard for them to find a job and get a job.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that's what makes me wonder, you know. I didn't drop out, but I struggle every once in a while, but I got good people around me everywhere, so it's not as bad. But for people that don't have that, it can be really bad, you know. So that's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah.
On the dropout rate, are you looking at 18 or 22? Because I know special education children often stay in school a couple more years.
Right. I believe that the way that this is calculated has changed, but for a long time, once a student was in high school 4 years, then if they stayed beyond that, if they didn't graduate after 4 years, they were considered a dropout. But now that extends to 5 years. But again, beyond that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether the 19, 20, the kids are there 5 or 6 years in high school, whether they are considered dropouts already. I know the 5-year kids are not considered dropouts any longer, but I don't know about the 6-year. I'd have to check into that. But that's a good point. Okay, so just to give you some idea of our students and the types of diplomas that they have earned. First of all, the certificate of completion is not considered a diploma, and 17% of our students in 2017 left school with a certificate of completion, meaning that they had met their IEP goals, but they did not earn a diploma. Students that received a general diploma, there were 32.8% of students with disabilities. The Core 40 diploma, 44% of our students with disabilities received that diploma. Core 40 with academic honors, there were 3.8% of students with disabilities. Core 40 with technical honors, and then Core 40 with academic technical honors, and an international baccalaureate. So I think another myth of special education is that our students with disabilities can't do, when in fact many and most can. And our whole emphasis in our department is to try to educate and provide technical assistance to the schools so that they will continue to find better ways to raise the bar for kids with disabilities and see more and more of those kids earn a diploma. Yes?
The goals on these data points here in this particular sheet, do you have a level or a threshold you're hoping to shoot for or obtain?
We don't have a formal target. We just want to see increases every year. I would challenge schools to look at that number of kids who graduate with a certificate, or that leave with a certificate of completion, because the federal government says that only 1% of the student population should be in a category where they can't earn a diploma. And we have about 3% of our students with disabilities, 3 or 4%, who wind up in not earning a diploma. So a lot of our kids, after their second year of high school, realize they don't have enough credits, and so they are put on a certificate of completion instead of a diploma path. We're going to talk a little bit more about that certificate of completion in a minute and how we're trying to raise the bar for that, for earning that designation as well. But I would suggest that at least 97% of our kids should be graduating with some high school diploma. Okay, so here's the exit data for the certificate of completion. Last year we had 8,207 students leave high school. 1,394 received the certificate of completion, which was the 17% that I talked about. Oops. Here are some other post-school outcomes that there are some good news and bad news within this data. First of all, youth who enrolled in higher education within 1 year of exiting high school, we do a study 1 year out, and we found that in the trend seems to be around 30% of our students enroll in higher education within 1 year of exiting high school. Last year, 39.34% of our youth were competitively employed within 1 year of high school. So that's the good news. And then youth who were enrolled in some other post-secondary education, more good news, about 5.73%, that's usually in the military. So of the options of employment and higher ed or post-secondary, and then also the youth who are in some other employment. Those are all goals that we have, and all of those I think all of those percentages are positive. I don't know. I could check that though. Yeah. There are still 13.93% of our students who leave high school and a year later are unemployed and not in school. And those are the students that we really need to do a better job with. Something else we look at, and I briefly mentioned earlier, was disproportionality. We really think that it's critical that we improve equity for our students and that all students are treated fairly. And we monitor this, and if schools are showing that students are not, or that they are disproportionately identifying students or disciplining students, then we provide technical assistance to that school to help them become compliant. And, you know, these numbers are not horrible. Some of these schools overlap. So suspension and expulsion for all students with disabilities. We only have one school that's out of compliance. Suspension and expulsion by race, we only have three schools out of compliance. Disproportionality representation by race, we only have one school out of compliance, and then disproportionality representation by disability category, we have 11. When you think that we have 387 school corporations in this state, 11 is not bad, but it's still something that we are working on and provide a lot of technical assistance around in order to help schools improve. Another area that we're really focusing on is improving access to the general education curriculum. And the best place to have general education curriculum provided is obviously in the general education classroom. We are at 73.9% of our students who are in general education for the majority of their day. And that, when you look at the national average, is higher than the national average. But in my mind, if you look at our graduation rate as around 71%, and then you look at the number of kids who are in general ed the majority of the day, that's 73%, I'm wondering what it would look like if those numbers increased. You know, as we, not all, but the majority of the research indicates that students have, both general ed and students with disabilities have better outcomes when they're served in a general education classroom. So it's our mission to try to improve that rate. Another thing that's very important to us is in maintaining good parent relationships. We partner with InSource, and we have a good working relationship with that organization that provides supports to parents. We also work with ASK and other parent organizations as we can. This shows you from a survey that's sent out to all parents every year. We're seeing that 97% of our parents reported that they felt involved in their child's planning program. And that, to me, is a very good sign. If you look at funding for special education, we have really 4 different sources of funding that I can report. I don't have the amount of money that schools individually add to these funds that are available to them. But at the federal level, we receive funding for the ages 3 to 5 population, and then the ages 3 to 21 population. And that's the majority of the funding that we receive and manage in our office. This is a formula grant, so there's a certain formula that we plug in, and then from that we figure out individual corporation allocations. We actually just got our federal allocations for next year, and we received $5 million additional dollars from the federal government for special education, so that's good news. I think other areas were flatlined or cut, but when it came to special education, they actually increased the federal budget for that. I think there was a 2.5% increase in the federal budget. State funding is another source. In this particular funding, this is not a formula. This is based on the child count. So students students fall in 4 categories, depending on their disability. The severe disabilities, the mild and moderate disabilities, and the communication disorder or homebound students. And then the preschool gets a flat amount no matter what your disability is. And I'll show you those breakdowns on the next page. We also have Medicaid claiming services that are available to schools. Schools are not required to claim Medicaid, but they have the opportunity to claim for services provided to students for speech and OT and PT, or they can claim administrative services. And this year, schools received $15 million from Medicaid. And then the last funding source is for high-cost, high-need students, and this is on a student-by-student basis. Schools apply for this money, and every year the legislature allocates $24 million to be put towards that. Yes?
Medicaid claiming, are those therapists employees of the school system, or?
Yes, most of them are, yes. Another myth that is out there is that this money is taking away Medicaid funds for families, and that's not true. They're 2 separate pots of money. And so by the school accessing these funds, we are not in any way harming the funding that's available to parents to provide other services at home.
Just based on our prior conversations, what does a school system typically pay for an OT or a PT?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would say that I know where I came from in Johnson County, we paid them on a teacher scale. So this shows you the breakdown of that state funding by disability category, and this year any student who was identified with a severe disability, the school received $8,976. Any student with a mild or moderate disability, the school received $2,300, and then for communication disorder or homebound, the school received $500. And as I said earlier, preschool has been flatlined since 1993 at $2,750 per student. Homebound is if a student is unable to come to school because of their disability. And actually, homebound can also be for a student who's not a student with a disability, but has a chronic illness or a temporary issue where they have to be kept at home and receive tutoring at home.
Can I ask why that's so much lower for homebound? I'm assuming these are more severely disabled individuals. Why is that such a lower amount?
Well, because it's added on to the other amount. All of the students have other than speech, anybody who's homebound already has to have another disability unless it's a general ed student who is receiving tutoring for their gen ed classes. So that's, I don't know, it's been that way for a long time. So if a student has a severe disability, the school would get $8,976 plus the $500 if they receive speech services too.
So do you know how many of those 75,000 are the kids with severe mild and moderate?
Yes. If you go back to this chart, the ones that are considered severe are multiple disability, blind or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, emotional disability full-time.
You know, my question was how many of them are in the homebound?
Oh, in homebound. I can find that out for you. I don't know off the top of my head.
I've just heard a general trend that more kids are getting services at home and less in the classroom.
I've heard that trend is increasing, and that is a concern for us. Okay, these are some of the top initiatives that our office is working on, and I promise I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I did want you to see that we're working really hard to provide all kinds of supports and services for schools, and if anyone has a question on any of these individual ones, I'll be happy to answer them. But what I'd like to focus on are the first one, the ESSA and FAPE initiative. For those who aren't educators, ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was passed in December of 2015. And we received guidance from the Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level also in 2015, but in November instead of December. And in that particular Dear Colleague letter, we were provided guidance on what we should consider a free, appropriate public education. So what we did is part of developing this framework was to operationalize the messages in those two, in the legislation and then in the document that outlined what a free, appropriate public education is. So we have two things that we have been doing regularly that we hope is getting messages to the field, and one of them is something called Short Shares, and that's a 5-minute video that you can access on our website, and it talks about just one portion of this graphic. You can click on the graph, and then you can pull up a video that's only 5 minutes. We figure every teacher has 5 minutes to look at something, and it provides in-depth information on that one particular topic. And we've been doing this for the last 2 years now. It's through YouTube, and we have tracked the number of hits, and I didn't bring that with me, but it's been very successful in reaching schools and teachers to get the message out about our expectations for the services they provide. And then the other thing that we have been doing is something called Spread the Word, our Spread the Word series, which is a document that goes in depth into one particular category or issue. So we've done them on attention deficit disorders, on dyslexia, on specially designed instruction. We just take one topic and we really break it down and provide lots of in-depth information to folks. And we post all of these on the Learning Connection so anyone can access them. And then the last thing that we've really tried to focus on to get our message to the field is coffee talks, and these are 15-minute videos, so you can have a cup of coffee while you're listening to someone share information that hopefully is valuable to you. So that's one of the initiatives that I wanted to talk about. The other one is our Certificate of Completion revisions, and as you can see, all of the disability areas are represented in the number of students who received a certificate of completion. So, the highest one is the mild cognitive disabilities, where 26% of the students who left in 2017 left with a certificate of completion. But as you can see, this is not just the kids with significant cognitive disabilities, this is across the board. So we have a position statement that we developed with a group of stakeholders, and the position statement is that we always try to work towards diplomas first. I've been in meetings where parents will say, that decision was made for my child in 3rd grade. And there's absolutely nothing that requires people to make that kind of a decision about a child's life that early. So we've been trying to message that whenever we talk about the certificate of completion work, is that decision to remove a child from the diploma track is something that can wait and should wait. One of the things that we have done through the certificate work is that we developed, first of all, a timeline for how we can improve the certificate of completion requirements. So we started meeting with stakeholders from FSSA and Workforce Development and InSource and the ARC of Indiana and many, many others that are part of our transition council, and we've started meeting to look at this and try to improve upon the requirements. We continued in 2016 to raise awareness and to provide technical assistance, and then we also completed a new course of study that will apply to all students who are working on a certificate of completion. And this is our course of study that we developed. And as you can see, it looks a lot like a diploma, but instead of earning credits, students can also earn applied units. And the applied unit courses are based on the alternate standards that we are required to provide for some students with disabilities, and those courses then mirror a regular diploma. We're requiring students to get 8 credits or units of English and language arts and 4 credits or units of math. What we found when we talked with parents, particularly across the state, what we found is that when students were removed from the high school diploma path and put on a certificate of completion, they may never have another science class again, or they may never have a math class or a social studies class. And our stakeholder group, we adamantly feel that that's wrong. Kids deserve the right to have the same curriculum and the same opportunities as every other student. Our kids are no different other than the fact that they have some sort of disability that's impeding their learning in some respect. So we are rolling this out this fall. Schools have been aware of this for the last 2 years, and we have been providing lots of support and training around it. We also focus on employability skills here because, as you can see from our outcomes, we still had lots of kids that were not employed, and we wanted to make sure that when kids left high school that they had all of the skills that other students are receiving, or at least the opportunity to gain those skills, and that they also had an opportunity to improve their employability. Here's just an example of our applied courses and our units, and it shows the regular course description for math, and then it shows the applied business math. It shows what content connectors or alternate standards are aligned with that class. It shows you the workplace essentials that are aligned with that class, and then it shows you how many units you can get, what grade level we would suggest this be taught in, and what COC requirements it meets. And we've done this for over 60 courses, and they were all approved by the State Board of Ed in December. So now when students are working toward a certificate of completion, they will see on their transcript either business math if they took the regular course, or they'll see applied business math with grade, just like everybody else. One of the concerns that's always raised when we discuss this is, well, what do we do about the kids who can't? And that seems to be the immediate response. What do we do about the kids who just can't do this? And my response is, every child can do this, because we take the students from where they are and we move them toward these academic standards. Even if it's something as basic as pointing to letters or using a switch in order to determine a yes or no response, every child has a right to learn English, math, science, social studies. And we make that very clear that we have taken can't out of our vocabulary. Here's the timeline, the future timeline. The summer and fall of 2017, we did training for school personnel and parents. The fall of 2017, we worked with the vendors who do the school information systems to make sure that they could capture this information the way it needs to be captured. In December, as I said, the State Board approved the 60 applied courses. In the winter and spring, we've done ongoing training, and we've reviewed all the alternate standards. And then in the fall, we expect schools to begin rolling this out. We have given schools a one-year leeway, so if they're not ready to roll this out this coming September, we expect that by the following year that they will be rolling it out. So, next steps for us, we're continuing to add resources to our webpage, and we are working with a subset of the statewide transition group to work with employers, let them know that we're preparing our kids, so even if they don't earn a diploma, they still can be valuable employees, worthwhile partners, and we are determining ways to get this information to employers. And then we're also developing a format for a transition portfolio, so when kids leave, they have all of the information of the skills that they have and the jobs that they have available to employers. Any questions about that before I go into this last part? It's a lot of information, I know. And thank you for staying with me. So there's been some questions around the alternate diploma, and that's something that I thought you might just want some additional information on. The legislature was recently passed that assigned the State Board of Education the task of developing an alternate diploma that is standards-based, aligned to requirements of the high school diploma, and obtained within the time period for which the state ensures the availability of FAPE. So that means that the student will now have until age 22 to earn the alternate diploma as well. The good news is that because we have done all of this work for the certificate of completion, it will meet all of the federal requirements for an alternate diploma. So if the State Board of Education wants to adopt the certificate of completion as the alternate diploma, then their work is done. So that's my information. Any questions?
Yes, what recommendation would you like to see?
Well, you know, since you asked everyone else, I had time to kind of think about that. So here are just some thoughts. I first believe that it's important for this group to acknowledge the capabilities of people with disabilities. So throughout our recommendations, we have to continue to acknowledge that every child, every adult with a disability is capable, and we need to make sure that that's loud and clear. I would also want to encourage ongoing agency collaboration. We've done a lot of collaborating with other agencies, the Department of Mental Health, FSSA. I think it's important that we continue to encourage schools and other agencies to collaborate and find vehicles to make that easier so that we can work together to help kids with disabilities. Third, I think it's critical that we find ways of continuing to support families. You know, when I was listening to Christina, I thought, you know, families are really embraced in First Steps, and it's a whole family student approach. And then when they get to school, a lot of those family supports are no longer there. So we need to find ways to continue to support families, particularly in those transition areas, either from First Steps to school or from school out to adult life. Recruiting and retaining staff is an issue for schools as well as other agencies. We have a significant drop-off in the number of students or kids who go on to college to become teachers, just teachers, much less specialty areas. So if there are ways that we can encourage incentives, loan forgiveness, anything that will incentivize people to go into the field of education, I think that that's critical. Acknowledge the need for raising expectations. Too many people have been lulled into this ongoing conversation that talks about what they can't do rather than what they can do. So I really think it's critical that we talk about continuing to raise expectations. We need to focus on that mental health and opioid crisis. That's a serious issue in the state and across the nation. I think it's critical that we focus on those transition periods, the 0 to 3 into school and then after school, because why else are we here but to make sure that kids transition successfully and can lead independent lives that are productive and good citizens. And so I think that that's really critical that we focus on those transition times. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that presentation. Really good news. Dr. Grossi, who is going to do the post-secondary options in higher education, has most graciously agreed to come and present at the employment meeting because we've kind of run out of time, and I apologize to you. We will ensure that you have plenty of time to make your presentation. And thank you for accommodating us because we want to be respectful of the board's time. Appreciate you all being here. It was a lot of information, wasn't it? But some good information. So, are there any questions or any points anyone wants to make before we adjourn? Our next meeting is on Wednesday, June 27th at 10 a.m. at Porter County Community Foundation in Valparaiso. And with no further business